You're on.
My name is Lyle Abbott. I was born February 18, 1913 in Monmouth, Illinois. My father's name was George Preston Abbott. My mother's name was Esther May Relyea. My father's mother came from Ireland, Cork County, Ireland, and her name was Mary Beer.
Yeah.
And my mother's father was of Cherokee descendant. There were 9 children in our family. We had 5 boys and 4 girls. The oldest of our family was Esther. The next was Bill, and the next was Viola. The next was Grace. Next was Orrin. Next was George. Next was Jenny. And then myself, and then Don.
So you were second to the youngest?
Mom.
My name is Eva Abbott. It was Eva Swedberg. My father was from Sweden, from Bollnäs, Sweden, and he grew up in Bollnäs. His father ran the King's Inn, or a resting place where the noble came to change their horses and sleep overnight. There were 13 barmaids, and so we got to know quite a few of the nobility from Russia and Sweden. And Mother was of Norwegian descent. She was from the place of Stavanger, and Stavanger is where they have the Norwegian dress to this day. It's a native Norwegian dress. They came to America. Mother was matron at Mason City, Iowa, where she met my father. I was born in 1912 in Marshalltown, Iowa.
May 13th.
I said May 13th, didn't I? May 13th? Sure, 1912. And I had quite a number of half-brothers and sisters. I had 4 real brothers and sisters, 2 brothers and 2 sisters. There were 5 in our family. There was Ted, and there was Alice, and Rachel, and myself, and my younger brother, Bud, Harold. Okay, is that okay?
Yeah, that's great. Great. Doing fine. Just keep it going like you're not even on camera.
You better.
Yeah. And maybe you could tell me what is your earliest memory that you can recall?
As a child?
As a child.
Come on, Dad. What's your earliest? No, I'll do. No, you want Daddy, don't you?
Yeah, go ahead.
Of course you want
Papa.
Daddy. Yes, my
You can be thinking about it, Grandma, while
Well, I
Grandpa's
don't
thinking
think it
about
was
it.
stand by the kitchen
hold
stove
that
wetting
thing,
my
'cause I don't
britches.
have-
You remember? Grandma, go ahead and say.
No, I
Grandpa.
won't. No, I won't.
Yes, you will.
No, I
Yes, you will.
won't.
Yes, you will. Come on, Grandma.
Oh,
Your
no.
second earliest memory then.
Well, is it on now?
No, it's off. You can tell it's off camera.
Oh, sweetheart, you're just tricking me.
Honest, John.
It's on. Go ahead, Grandma.
One of my earliest memories was standing by the kitchen stove, and I was cold, and feeling the warmth of the wood stove. I was very small. And then one other early memory was a hustle and bustle. There were 2 times when I was very young. I remember all the excitement of preparation. Papa had business people coming to look at some of his experiments, of his patents. He had the patent for the round building, which is now used for your grain storage buildings. And he had a patent on a hydraulic ladder that we used on fire wagons. And then he had another patent for a car. I remember the models and all the excitement of those businessmen coming from some big city, Chicago or someplace. Then the other time I remember I was very small. I wasn't in school, but I remember this quite vividly because we were all getting Papa. It was always Papa. We never called him Dad or Daddy. It was always Papa. We got Papa ready to go to Chicago. He had an invitation from Olaf Augustus. He was crown prince at that time, it was about 1917. And so, you see, I would have been about 5 years old then. And we had to get him a new suit. We had to be sure his shoes were polished and his shirts were ready and all that, and his cuffs links. And it was an exciting time.
How old were you?
Well, I must have been about 4 or 5, because it was 1917, just before the war, and the prince was visiting the United States, and he had an invitation to meet the prince in Chicago, and I believe it was at the Palmer House, but I'm not real sure. Mm-hmm.
Could you think of anything, Papa? You can't think of anything?
Sure you can.
When you were 5 or 6.
Oh, I could remember when I was, I don't remember how old I was, about 4 years old, I think. It was on the 4th of July, and my sister Esther and her husband Pete were over, and I can remember standing out on the back porch of our house, and Pete and Esther were using the sparklers, and they were making the huge circles with their... And then I can remember when my mother took me the first day in school, we had a little school teacher, her name was Miss Brooks, and she wore a little fur collar. I can remember that day, and I didn't particularly want to go to school. I can remember my early school days that in the 3rd grade, I especially remember one time we had a teacher's, she was a red-haired teacher, and her name was Miss Boylan. And one day I was rolling the pencils. The desk was slanted a little bit. I would roll the pencils up and they'd roll back, and it didn't bother me, but apparently it disturbed her, and she came back with a ruler and swatted my hand, or smacked my hands a little bit. And then I remember while I was in the 3rd grade that, well, I think over that same incident, Miss Boylan kept me in it. Instead of letting me go to lunch at noon, she kept me in one of the rooms there where they kept the sports equipment, the basketballs and baseball and things like that. And my mother missed me, and she came, and Miss Boylan had forgotten that she put me in that closet. And so my mother had an opportunity to tell her she didn't like that.
Did you chew her out?
Well, yeah, she chewed her out. I didn't call it that at that time. But, well, I could remember...
Maybe any other special events or circumstances from your childhood?
Yeah,
Tell about your time you drank at the fountain and slept today.
well,
How you crippled yourself.
This is probably one of the, as I look back now, it's probably one of the, as I look back on it, I could see the Lord's working in my life, because we used to, some of the children in our Sunday school and church, we met on a Sunday afternoon, and after we had our meeting, we always stayed in the church and played cops and robbers, or at least that's what we called it at that time. And on the particular room that we were playing in, they had a linoleum on the floor, and right at the doorway there was a drinking fountain, and somebody had left a knob on the fountain turned on, and it filled up and ran over, and the floor was wet, and I didn't realize it. We were playing and I was running hard, and as I came to the door, I slipped, and my right leg went through the door, and my left leg was caught, and so it just pulled me apart, and to pull my left leg out of the socket. And I knew I was hurt, and when I couldn't get up, all the children climbed out the window. That's because the building was locked, and there was only one boy. There was a little black, his name was Johnny Peoples, and so he went out, and I got a man going by. It happened to be my neighbor, Art Josephson, and he carried me home. And for about 6 weeks, all I did was just crawl. And when my mother took me to the doctor just the next day after I'd had this accident, and the doctor said there wasn't any bones broken, there wasn't any real injury, so they didn't really look at it too seriously. Well, for 5 years I was a cripple. I couldn't bear my weight really on that leg. Then when I was 14 years old, I was playing football, just sandlot football, out at the college during the half of a college football game, and a boy ran into me. I was running, and a boy ran into me, hit with his head, hit right on that leg, and broke my leg. And I could remember lying on the ground and thinking, because I had, even from the time I was very small, I was thinking about I wanted to be a minister. And I thought, well, as I was lying there, I'm not ever going to be able to do this. I'm not ever going to be able to be a minister. And finally, when they brought the doctor, Dr. Graham was our doctor, and he was also a college doctor, and he was there at the football game. And he came over and lifted up my leg, and I knew my leg was broken. So while we were waiting there for the ambulance, apparently the ambulance was not in service, so they brought the hearse. And when I saw the hearse coming up on the football field, I thought, oh my, I'm really worse than I thought I was. And so anyway, I was in the hospital for several days before our Dr. Graham came, and he had several other doctors with him, Dr. Ebersole and Dr. Campen, Dr. Sherrick, and they built a large frame on the bed, and they said, Lyle, we're going to have to set your leg. And then Dr. Camp asked me if I'd ever had tuberculosis of bone, and I said, not that I know of. He said, there in the x-ray it shows that there is a sort of a cartilage built around that hip joint. And then he said, I could remember you had a injury some years ago, and I told him about it, and he said, apparently what happened, that hip joint was pulled out of the socket. It was never put back in, and that cartilage had grown around that joint. So what they had to do was to give me an anesthetic, and they forced that joint back into the socket, and then they taped and put, well, they had tape on my legs, and they had a pulley, and they had buckets of sand so that it would pull both legs evenly. And I was in the hospital there until, well, about 8 weeks. And then when I got out. I was on crutches for several months, but and apart from just having one leg a little shorter than the other, after I got to walking, I went out in high school athletics. I was only a sophomore in high school, but I went out for athletics and swimming, every activity that I could. And I remember the doctors that ministered to me in the hospital. I caddied for them during the summer at the golf course, and they always encouraged me to get out and run as hard as I could run and swim and do all those activities that would. And over the years, I realized that but the Lord's hand was in that. Even though breaking a leg was not a pleasant thing, yet it was the means of correcting that bad situation.
Thank you, Paul. How about you, Mom?
Well, back when I was quite small, I remember several things that come back to me now as I'm older. And one was when I was about 5 or 6. I used to have my younger brother to play with, and I didn't have many other playmates around. There was a little Indian boy. His name was Manson Foster, and I'd often stop there and play with him. He had an electric train, and I enjoyed playing. It was something new then. And then there was another young man that was very good. His folks had come over to the United States from Germany. It was before the war. And he had a brother that painted, a very good painter. He painted the picture of the St. Bernard dog rescuing the little girl in the snow. This young German boy used to climb up on the chicken house and get me black walnuts and crack the walnuts for me. He was very kind and very attentive, and I don't know why, he just took a special fancy in showing kindness to me. And when they left that area and moved to another part, he brought me this large painting that his brother gave me of that St. Bernard dog. And then another instance I remember was when I first went to school in the first grade. I was asked to stop by a house. There was a little girl that had come over from Czechoslovakia, from Bohemia then, and her name was Louise Prochaska. Her mother was very thin and careworn. They wore homespun dresses. Louise had a little grayish homespun dress, homemade, she had long blonde braids. Very pretty girl. And I took her to school that first day. And from the first grade all through the 8th grade, there was scarcely a day that we weren't together. We played together, we shared together. We were very close friends. And those were special times in my life as I was growing up. You turned off?
No, it's still going. Did you, Mom, did you have a favorite sibling?
You want me to tell about my youth?
No, just a favorite brother or sister. Why were they?
Well, I think probably my favorite brother was Bud, my younger brother, because my sister Alice and sister Rachel were older than I. Rachel grew faster, matured earlier, had dates, many, and I never was invited to go along for some reason. I didn't understand why, and I used to cry because I couldn't go with her. But Mother always said, well, your time will come, and it did later on. But then I was kind of lonely, and so Bud was my companion. Boys were very much my companions, and I understood them and I liked them. I liked them very much. I didn't understand how girls could giggle so, and that's the truth, you know. I never understood, even in the dormitory when I was in college. I'd see the girls giggle. I don't know what in the world they were giggling about, but anyway, Bud and I went hunting. I helped him ferret out the rabbits and went hunting the traps. Thank you. And he was a very good instructor, and we shared many wonderful times of hunting and hiking together and doing the things. We had a miniature golf course on our pasture that hit everything but the holes.
Hit the cows, huh?
Yeah.
Must be time for a commercial break.
You should,
Not yet. Where did you grow up, Papa?
I grew up in that same little town of Monmouth, Illinois. I spent quite a little bit of my time squirrel hunting, rabbit hunting. We had a little dog that belonged to my sister Grace. His name was Ginger, that I used to take along hunting.
How about you, Grandma? Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Marshalltown, 1508 South 6th Street. It was the last house on the road and the last house inside the city limits. Across the street it was country. It was farmland. There was much farmland. There was a big woods called Big Woods and another place called Little Woods. And I remember when I was small of a boy going hunting rabbits up there in Little Woods, and there was a gunshot, and he had accidentally let his gun discharge, and he shot his brother in the leg, and he lost his leg. I remember as we grew up, one thing I liked very much about my home life then as a child, I liked to lie out on the front lawn and watch the storm clouds. And even then when I was a child, I used to wonder at the majesty and the majesticness of the Lord. I knew there was a God, and I thought how great he was. I wasn't afraid of the storm. I could see the power of God in those clouds and the beauty of God. And then when I didn't get to go to Sunday school, I'd go on a horse. It wasn't much of a horse. It was a plow horse, and it had a broad back, so I wasn't very likely to fall off. And I used to go out in the country, ride that thing out, and then get in the grass and hunt the wildflowers. We often hunted wildflowers there in Iowa. We went out early while the ice was still on the creek, and we got the pussy willows and the Johnny jump-ups and the crocus and different thing like that. It was very wonderful, you know, growing up like that. My childhood I liked in that respect because I could be out there, and I marveled much. I didn't know God, but I knew there was something very wonderful about nature, and there must be some power in the nature.
What do you remember about your teenage years, Grandma?
About my teenage? Well, I forgot to tell you, when I was very little, I wasn't 5 yet. I was maybe, that was one of my earliest recollections. My sister Alice and my sister Rachel were playing house on our big front porch. It was cement and it circled with wood rails. They had out there one of these sun couches made of heavy canvas with iron rail on it, and they were pretending it was a stove. I came out of the house and sat on it, and of course it was terrible. I sat on their stove, so they gave me a quick push, and in pushing me they cut me right down through the right from my temple right down to my right eye, and it doesn't show a scar, but it cut down to the optic nerve, and it left quite a thing during the life. I had a weakness there anyway, so that it left me with what you call, what do you call that, Papa? You know. What do you call it? Well, you know. and a weak eye. Anyway, I went and always had problems. Who did? Oh, what do you call that? You know.
Mommy, astigmatism.
And something else. You have Dr. Weber says it's...
Lazy eye?
Lazy eye, that's right. Dr. Weber says it begins in the brain. So it must have hit me pretty hard.
Mother, be careful.
Oh, it's on tape, isn't it?
You'll be making confessions.
You better turn it off. Yeah.
What about you?
And that was a hardship, really. That was a hardship through life. But you know, God was so wonderful. He gave me grace even when I didn't know him. It was a hardship though, because I had so many doctor bills and treatments and so forth to try to correct and help it. It was difficult.
That was when you were about 5?
Mm-hmm. Well, it was before I was 5, really.
Well,
I must have been, that was the very earliest recollection I have had.
Well, what about your teenage years?
My teenage, well, my teenage was up and down. When we started, we changed our school and we went up to another school uptown. And I was going into the 8th grade then. Then we changed friends. And Louise was going with another girl, Hazel Morgan, from the drugstore. And she was maturing more rapidly than I was. I was always tiny. Oh yes, I must tell you this. This was a funny thing too. When I was young, Mother thought she was going to make me a violin player, you know. And I didn't have a note in my body, anything that was sour. And so, you know, when I took lessons, well, and the lesson I took was from my friend's sister. Her name was Alice, and they were neighbors to us. Gladys and I were friends, and she was a little younger than I was. I have to tell you about this. This is funny. We were one autumn evening, a very beautiful autumn evening. Gladys and I were picking up leaves and just goofing off. We lived not far from the golf club. And it was a country club, and all the elite there went to their dances and to their special parties. And they came back down our road, the honeymooners or whoever they were, the lovers, came down that road. And Gladys and I knew they were having a party that night. So we positioned ourselves. Her home was on High Bank and up behind some trees. And I positioned myself on the other side of the road, and we gathered a bushel basket of leaves and with our arms. So when these open cars came, and they were beautiful cars, and these well-dressed people came, we would jump out and throw the leaves on them. Well, it kind of boomeranged on us, because there was one couple, the young man didn't take it very lightly. He jammed his brakes on and got out of the car and took out after Gladys. And Gladys couldn't quite make it up the bank, and he caught her. And he went with her to her home, to her mother and father. And she peeled a wash basket of potatoes all the next day. They had a large farm, and they fed farm hands. And then she's often tied, chained. They put a strap on her to keep her from running away. And I ran on home, so I didn't get the consequences of it. But
they tied her up while she worked?
Oh yes, they had to, because Gladys used to come down to see me quite a bit, and she'd run off and I'd get her work done. So they would, you know, one of these little straps, halters on her. And Gladys is, I'll show her a picture if you want to pick her out. She's very beautiful. She went to Hollywood later on, and she married Mr. Stone. I think he had something to do with pictures. I don't know just what he was. But anyway, I have Gladys's picture. Well, as I grew up then, I was kind of alone. After Louise started going with Hazel Morgan, I didn't have a special friend. I had one. Her name was Agnes Higgins, and Agnes was a little plump girl. Well, I was very lonely. I missed Louise, and I felt very hurt. So I didn't get close to, I had different friends, but not the closeness that Louise and I had had. And then I had a very, going on into the school, I loved to study. I enjoyed my high school very much. I loved it. Oh yes, and I want to tell you this instance, because I never forgot this. When I was taking lessons from Louise's sister Alice, I didn't like to take lessons, but they were determined. They were making a musician of me, and I never liked it. I didn't like to study. I didn't like to practice the violin lessons. It didn't sound right to me, and I'm sure it didn't sound right to anybody else, because it squealed and howled, and I just didn't know how to do it. And so when I'd go over there, anyway, I had two sisters that were teachers in the same public school where I went, and that was horrid. And so they always put me on the program. And if it even sounded like I could do a melody, they thought, you know, that I was some special talented genius, and which I wasn't at all. But one day they put me on the program for the school assembly. And I was very small then. I wasn't very large. I don't suppose I was more than 7. But anyway, I brought my violin, and much against my will, I didn't want to do it. But I was going to play Flow Softly Sweet Afton, or something like that, you know. Well, anyway, I'll tell you, I put my case in our long hallway. In the school, they had the coats and hats and things, and the shoes and rubbers in that hallway. And I put my case in there. I had tuned it in the kindergarten by the piano, so I left it open foolishly. I didn't think anything about it, and just set my violin down there, ready for the program. And as the different grades came and sat on the stairs, and we all gathered in that open hallway, and it was crowded, my turn came to play my Flow Softly Sweet Afton. My Flow Softly Sweet Afton didn't flow very softly. It sounded like the roaring fork, and it was squealing just like a cat that was hanging by its tail, and it was all out of tune. Some little smarty had gotten in there and screwed all my strings, and you can imagine how that violin sounded. And I went back, but you know, I wasn't really embarrassed. I was glad it was over. But I'm sure my sisters were embarrassed, and I know they were, but soon after I was allowed to quit, and I was glad.
Grandpa.
Is that terrible, Leigh? It was terrible. They never put me on a program. Did you ever do something like that, Eddie? You played your piccalilli, remember? Tell them about the time you sold your horn to come to see me.
No.
Oh yes, that's in our teenage, Dad. You sold your horn, remember?
I remember one of my, I think I was probably 13 years old. My brother Don and I wanted to go rabbit hunting one Thanksgiving Day, and we only had one shotgun, so I thought, well, I would go down to Mr. Duncan, one of our neighbors, and because I knew he had a good little shotgun. I had never used it, but I had seen him several times with it, so I made up my mind it was a 410 shotgun, and we had plenty of 410 shells, so I went down and asked him if I could borrow his shotgun. He said yes. So we brought it, and we went. It would only be probably a 10-minute walk out to one of the good cornfields where good rabbit hunting. But when I got out in the field and was going to put the shell in the shotgun, I found out that 410 went right down through the barrel. So I realized that it wasn't a 410, and I looked at on the barrel it says a 28 gauge, and I'd never heard of it. So in order for us to go rabbit hunting, I went back and talked to one of the men at the hardware store, and he went down to it was on Thanksgiving, so he went down and opened up the store and got me about a half a box of 28 gauge shells, and we went out, and it was about 5 or 6 inches of snow on the ground, And just after we got into the field looking for rabbits, I saw a squirrel running toward a large maple tree, and I thought, well, I might just well, while I'm hunting, I might just well get that squirrel. So in order to get within a good range of the squirrel, I had to go down in a little gully and back up on a little rise there to see the squirrel. And while I was getting down this gully, I fell, and I didn't realize that I had run the barrel of that shotgun into the snow, and I had packed the muzzle of that shotgun with snow, and I didn't realize it. But just when I got to the rise, the squirrel was just sitting up, just almost like I was going to take a picture of it, sitting up in the crotch of this maple tree, and I shot, and the gun kicked like a 12 gauge would, and then I looked at the front end of it, and it had a little knob on the end, and the barrel was split. So I realized that what had happened when I fell down in that snow and packed the muzzle of that gun full of snow and then shot, it ruined that gun. And when I got home, I was almost afraid to tell my father, and much more afraid to tell Mr. Duncan, but when I did tell my father, he said, well, the best thing you can do is just go to Mr. Duncan and tell him that you'll make it good. You'll have to get him another gun. So that's what I did. But I did learn a lesson there that I was never good to borrow something. And then another hunting experience I could remember a few years after that, after I'd met Eva, I was at their home on another Thanksgiving Day, and her brother Bud he got us up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I remember it was extremely cold and bright moonlight, and he wanted to go out and look at his traps. And there was another boy staying there, Howard Loving. And so the three of us went out looking at Bud's traps. And the very first, we just got to the first trap, and there was a skunk in the trap. But and Bud, well, he put it aside in a little cage, and then we went on, and he got several things out of the traps.
You caught it alive? He caught it alive?
Yeah, and he had a little trap there but oh brother, the odor. And then he got several other animals there, a muskrat and several animals. As we were on the way back, it was late in the afternoon, and while we were coming along back toward the Swedberg home, we saw a coyote coming across the field, and he hadn't seen us, but when he did see us, he ran down into the sort of a gully in the road, and we tracked him in the snow, and we saw where he went down between two culverts. He'd gone right in between them. So I said, well, I think I could go up along the road and get a little barbed wire off the fence. There was some barbed wire that was just wrapped around the top wire, and so I got this piece of barbed wire, and I went down. I thought, and I told Howard and Harold, now I'm going to reach in there and I can get a hold of him, and I'll pull him out and you can shoot him. So I kept putting the barbed wire back in that little place between the two culverts, and finally I felt I really had a load on there, so I thought, well, I've got this coyote. So I just kept pulling him a little close, and we were all real close to the end of that culvert, and when I got it out to the end, it wasn't a coyote, it was a skunk. And it came out, and and did what skunks do, and of course all of us were, it was terrible. We got sick, and then we had to go back to the house, and nobody would let us in. We had to
What
go
was
out.
Uncle Harold doing?
Huh?
What was Uncle Harold doing?
Well, Harold and Bud, they were right there with the guns, ready to shoot this
All covered.
coyote, and the skunk came out and fixed all of us. So when we went back, they brought us out other clothes. We had to take those clothes off in the barn, and did that. I can remember that hunting experience.
Do you guys need to take a break?
Hmm?
Do you need to take a break?
It's okay. What are you
You
gonna
okay?
ask now?
How did you guys meet?
Oh, you didn't ask us about our high school.
Teenage, Mother.
Teenage.
Tell your teenage.
Okay, tell them how you met.
No, Mother, go on with your teenage.
No, you can just go ahead and tell us how
Are
you
you ready?
met. Yeah.
How we met? Oh, brother.
You and me tell you how we met?
Yeah, and Grandpa can fill in
You
the
tell
blanks.
your version, I'll tell mine.
Okay, you tell us how we met.
Lean in
Well-
toward the Papa, Mom.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll tell you how we met. I was going to go to college at Monmouth, Illinois. My brother and sister-in-law were already there, Ted and Mary. Mary was a nurse in the doctor's office there. They had invited me to come and live with them and go to college. So that spring break, I went to register. And while I was going to register, Mary asked me if I'd do some collection for the doctor, go and collect some of his bills. So I got the collection list and started out to collect some money for the doctor. And as I was walking down the sidewalk, there were some boys over to my left playing football in the yard. And a bunch of boys, I didn't know who they were, and they were laughing and cutting up, and they started whistling at me. I knew they were whistling at me, but I didn't turn. I wasn't going to give them the advantage of thinking I'd even noticed them, and so I kept walking on, and I heard one of them say, well, I think it's time I better go home. And so he kicked the football, and it went right between my feet. Almost tripped me and made me a little aggravated, but I didn't turn around. And pretty soon I heard a Yankee Doodle whistle right behind me, almost on my heels. And I walked for blocks and blocks, and the faster I walked, the harder he whistled. And I still wouldn't turn around. I just kept going to where my first patient was I had to collect from. And that was my first encounter with Lyle. That was Lyle Abbott that was whistling on my heels. And now, what did you think when you saw me that day, Daddy?
What did I think?
Yeah, what did you think when you saw me that day when I was out collecting for a doctor?
Hubba, hubba, hubba.
Tiffany, you be that way.
Well, that's true.
Oh, Daddy. And so, when was the first time then we met?
That was it. Well, no.
We didn't meet, because I know I never turned around.
No, I remember
We
the
didn't
first.
meet.
It was just shortly after that, a few days after that,
How old were you?
17.
Yeah.
And I was a senior in high school, and Mom was she was
I hadn't started yet. I
going to
just
start her
registered.
freshman year in college. And
Where did we meet?
well, I remember Kenneth Hubler.
Oh,
That
yes.
was Mary. That was Ted's
Mary's
wife's
half-brother.
half-brother. Okay. I knew Kenneth, and so Kenneth invited me up
Oh,
to
yeah,
the
to play
apartment
cards.
to play blackjack.
That's right.
And
You were playing backjack.
We
And he
played-
kept watching my lips. I didn't know why in the world, He knew I wasn't playing
Not-
cards. He was watching my lips all the time. I thought maybe it was something, I had some dirt on my lips or something.
thank
You
you.
remember that, Daddy?
Yeah, I
Yes, you
remember
did.
that.
You should watch my lips all the time. I remember that. Oh yes, Daddy, and you had a hat, don't you remember?
Yes, and
And he spun that hat around.
What's your pants?
Yeah, he just spun that hat around and around, and I know he stayed late playing cards, and I had studying to do, and I said,
Well, she
I
said,
said-
don't you ever go home?
yeah. he just stood there and spun that hat, and I said, don't you ever go home? And that hurt his feelings. So then from then on, for a couple nights, he spun the hat down under a tree, where I could see him all the
Well,
time.
then the next thing I remember was that Mom
Oh,
had,
Jack, no, I
had
didn't really, but
scarlatina,
he was under a tree.
and she was quarantined.
He was standing on his head.
I've been ever since.
He was walking with his feet, you know, how you stand on your head and your feet up against the tree and walking around the tree.
Never happened to me.
And you said it wasn't you,
No, it
Daddy, but who was it
wasn't
then?
me.
Because I didn't have any
some
other
other-
admirer that stood on his head for me. It had to have been you.
And, well, no. But I could remember when Mom had scarlatina that
Yeah.
she was quarantined, and I
That
thought,
was
and
right.
so I used to, in the evening, I used to sneak up there and take her ice cream and
It was
after
Mrs.
she
Poole's
got
apartment place.
after she got out of quarantine, after she got feeling better, I would go up in the apartment,
And
I
read to
remember
me.
one night I was
Read my book
reading
reviews.
reading Up from Slavery. Remember that?
Booker T. Washington.
Book, yeah. And it must have been about 2 o'clock in the morning,
Yeah.
and the landlady, what was her name?
Poole.
Mrs. Poole,
Miss Poole.
came up and
She said,
she
Miss
said-
Swedberg,
Yes. And so
do you have someone up there with you?
just
What did you answer?
just chickens. No. I didn't. I thought, well, she's going to be waiting for me at the front, so I sneaked out the back door,
Huh.
and I had these big rubber boots on, and
You
at the
missed the
top
first
step,
step.
I
It was
missed that
icy?
first step. I
Anyway.
just plump, 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 plump. I hit every step, but not with my feet.
And so she
just
heard it, and she
sitting.
couldn't get around there fast
No.
enough to catch him.
So the next day at the college, the dean
Oh, yeah.
didn't call me in,
Call me.
but he called one of the boys in,
Oh, yeah, he didn't call
Bob
us.
Brimmer, and he asked Bob if he was
Seeing Miss Swedberg.
Miss Swedberg at the Poole's apartment, and Bob said, no, I never have. So I realized that she had thought it was
Bob.
Bob Brimmer,
Brimmer,
and that she never did find out.
No, who it was. And the president didn't, he talked to Mary and assured Mary. Mary said she'd see that I'd carry out dormitory hours, and we did carry them out, didn't we?
We did.
We carried them out into the morning.
We practically did away with them.
Where did you guys go on your first date?
We dated all the time,
Well,
honey.
first,
We never had a first one, did we?
Well, I think that first time was the time we played blackjack, and
Blackjack.
I won all the matches.
Oh, I don't remember.
With that, yeah.
And I never liked, Daddy was too much of a shark. I didn't like to play with him. He had too good a memory. He knew everything you had in your hand where you didn't even remember yourself. He knew what you had, and he was always very good, very
I
good.
remember on Friday night we used to play poker.
And I didn't like that either.
Up at Dr. Graham.
And then we had a party, and that wasn't a very nice party. You want to tell them about that?
Well, wait a minute, Mother.
Tell them about the poker first.
Poker?
Yeah, we used to go up, Jack Wirtz and Herb Fernald
Oh, yes, you
and
did.
Vern Fromm and myself. Used to go up on Friday evenings, and we would play poker all night at Dr. Blair's office. And then about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, we would call some of the people in the town on some of these
Cracky jokes.
I remember one night, one of the families in town, in fact, it was the mayor's,
Why?
Mr. Marillett. We called Mrs. Marillett about 2 o'clock in the morning, and one of the children answered the phone and said, "Is your mother there?" And they said, "Just a minute, I have to get her up." So they got her up, and I think it was Jack Wirtz who was on the phone, and he waited until Mrs. Merrill came, and he said, is this the lady that washes? And she said, why, no. He says, well, you dirty thing. And then another time I remember called the Spanish teacher in college. He had to come over from Spain, and he was a very, I don't know how to, he wasn't well liked.
No.
He was a very arrogant sort of fellow. And Bernard Fromm called where his name was Mr. Estrada, the Spanish teacher, and he lived in an apartment, and the landlady answered the phone. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning. It was during the Christmas holidays, and he said, is Professor Estrada there? She said, just a minute, I'll have to go get him. And he said, tell him that it's Western Union from Cleveland, Ohio, because he had been at Cleveland before he came to Monmouth. And so he said, this is Western Union. And of course, we could hear this fellow coming down the stairs, and Bernard said, Professor Estrada? He said, yes. I have a message here for you. You'll have to take, would you take a paper and pencil and copy it down after me? He said yes, and he was very nervous, expecting an emergency telegram or something. So Bernard said, there, and Mr. Estrada said, there. There isn't. Mr. Estrada said, there isn't. He said, there isn't any. There isn't any. There isn't any Santa Claus. And then he hung up. And when Mr. Estrada called back, the telephone operator said, there is a Professor Estrada on the phone that would like to speak. Would any of you gentlemen like to speak to him? And Bernard said, absolutely not. So then after that call, the telephone operator called Dr. Blair and told him that there were being phone calls made from his phone in the wee hours of the morning, and of course Dr. Blair knew that on Friday nights we were there, so he told us that there would be no more phone calls. So we used to play poker until about then maybe 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. We'd be down to the bakery right across from Dr. Blair's office at Strand's Bakery and get day-old donuts, and Dr. Blair in the office there had a malt mixer, so we would make malts and have malts and donuts along about 5, 6 o'clock in the morning. That's the way we... What were you saying about that? What?
Did you have it still on now, Johnny?
Yeah, it's still on. Do you guys need to take a break?
Huh?
Well, what special qualities did you notice in each other as you were dating?
And Daddy?
Oh.
Well, I'll tell you one thing I liked about Daddy. He was always a gentleman. He was always very courteous. He was very kind. And he was very humble. And, you know, and I'd tease him and say things to him, and then I wasn't very nice sometimes. And I remember once I called him a wop. And his sister was there, Esther, and Esther said she didn't like, I was teasing, but anyway, Esther wasn't teasing. She said to me, I let you know we don't have any of that in our family, and she meant it. Well,
what did that mean in your time?
Actually, well, at that time there was kind of
Italian.
It was Italian,
Well,
but then you know, that wasn't too bad. I mean, he was dark. Daddy had blue-black hair, And I always thought there was something distinctly foreign about him, but I couldn't prove it.
Cherokee.
But it was Indian, see? And I never knew. I thought it might have been Italian. I didn't know. But she corrected me and that right soon, you know. She didn't like that. But there were many qualities about Daddy that I think that was one thing that I liked about Daddy right away. And I never let him know I liked him right away. Really, did I?
Oh, I can remember
No, don't tell.
when we were still in college, we used to go up a
Yeah.
little place we called the
The
Hill.
hill.
I don't think it was really on a hill, but
It was a very pretty place.
we would go up there at night and
It was after we'd been in the library
Yeah.
pretending to study.
we went up on the hill and got caught up on our homework.
Yeah. Yeah, we did
And,
too.
Then
Reviewing.
when we would hear the college the bell ring,
Yeah, we could hear the bell ring.
we would run.
I was in the
as fast as we could
dormitory
run,
then.
And we never made it quite on time.
And Daddy was a very good runner.
Uh,
And I'll tell you, I was just straight out, and he was pulling me. And I wasn't very large then. I was a bit smaller than I am now. I was only 5'2", eyes of blue, and I only weighed 106 pounds. So he just pulled me along. And I get to the door of the dormitory, and the girl there knew me well. She was very nice to me. And she'd say, "Miss Swedberg, could you try to get here just a few minutes earlier?" And I would be usually the very last one to go through that door. But it was only Daddy that got me there before they shut it and locked it. They never locked it on me. I don't know why.
I remember one night, Mom's roommate.
Oh yes, I'll never forget
was-
that. That was, oh,
was
that
in
was
her
fun.
90, and
And it wasn't a nightie, Daddy. She had on these gingham pajamas. They were starched. And they were, you know, they stood out like a balloon. And no kidding, they were starched. And we had a big wide sill in our room, marble sill, and the big double windows. And they had the pull-down shades. Well, the pull-down shade was right over the front porch where all the couples and their dates came and said goodnight. And they could look right into our room standing there on that front porch. And don't you know, that night she went to pull down the shade because of the couples coming home from their dates. And she didn't want them looking in our room. Well, she climbed up on the sill and pulled it down. And I said, "Edith," I said, "don't climb up there, honey. They can see your silhouette there in the window." And she was a picture. So she didn't listen. She's determined she's going to pull that down. She pulled it down with a jerk, and it all came down over her. And all those dates out there on that front porch were just hysterical. They were laughing and watching us. And I said, I turned off the light real quickly, and I said, "Edith, get down from there. You're right in the limelight." Well, I turned off the light. She got it rolled back up and got it back up there. And don't you know, then she got it, started to come down and got her foot caught in it, and it came down again. And I'll tell you, I think we were on the front page of this college paper. I never was so embarrassed. Oh, she was a case, wasn't she, Daddy?
Papa, did
Edith.
your parents approve of Mom?
yes, very much.
When did you introduce her to them, or did they know about her?
Well,
They knew about me, don't you think? Well,
it was very interesting that while
Yeah,
Mommy and I
that's
were
true.
we were just starting to go together, and my parents, we had been going to a 9th Avenue Presbyterian Church, United Presbyterian Church, from the time I could remember. They'd always gone there. And we had an experience in our church. We had a pastor who was a very good man. He had a large family, and he was very interested in what he called reaching the he was going down beyond the tracks, down, as they always spoke of south of the tracks, and he said he wanted to go down in that area and reach some of those people who were unchurched people. That's the way he expressed it. But when he went down, and actually he did, he was very successful in getting many of those people interested in coming into the church. But it upset many of our church board because they said, our pastor is going down and getting the undesirables.
And they were Presbyterians.
And I remember one of our prayer meetings that there was a big quarrel over allowing the pastor to go down and to reach these undesirables. And when we got to our home, my father, I can remember my father said, I wonder in the Lord's eyes who really are undesirable. And as a result of this, my parents stopped going to that church. And they didn't go to church for several months. And then one night there was a special meeting in a Swedish Baptist church. It was called the Emmanuel Baptist Church. And before that, the services there had only been held in the Swedish language, just for the Swedish people, but most of the Swedish people had moved from that area, or there were only just 2 or 3 families. So they said, when we call a new pastor, why don't we call a pastor that will conduct our service in English? So the man that they got there, his name was Clifford Brumfield. He was just out of seminary, and he was a very evangelical, very good minister, and they had special meetings. And my parents went to those meetings, even though they were both in their 60s. And when they came home, I don't remember whether it was the first meeting, but anyway, it was during the summer, and my mother and my father came home. You could tell they'd both been crying. And mother came in, and my brother Don and I were in the kitchen fixing a little evening snack, and my mother came in and she said, I want you boys to know that your father and I were saved tonight. And I couldn't imagine I had never heard that expression, and I couldn't, the only thing I could imagine was that they were in danger of being run over by a car or something, and somebody had pulled them away from danger. That's the only thing I could imagine. But she told us, we accepted Jesus as our Savior, and we were saved tonight. And from that time on, my mother became very eager that her children should come to know the Lord. So she put a radio in my room where I would get to Moody Bible Institute. And I remember the experience that one time I took the tubes out of the radio, and Mother came up and the radio wasn't on, and it was the hour when there was a good gospel program that came on, and she said, Lyle, why isn't the radio on? I said, I don't know, it just quit. And so one of my brother-in-laws, Clyde Popel, was a good radio repairman, so she said, she got Clyde, and Clyde came up and said, there's nothing wrong with it, Mom, except there are no tubes in it. So we got the tubes back in it, and I realized one of the first times that even though Mom and I went to United Presbyterian Church, and Mother and Dad went to the Emmanuel Baptist, and Mom would always invite us to come to the evening service because United Presbyterian didn't have an evening service. So that particular night that Eva and I went with Mom and Dad to the Emmanuel Baptist Church, and Clifford Brumfield, the pastor, was preaching on the text, "The wicked are like the troubled sea." And I thought to myself, as I looked in that congregation, I could call everybody by their first name. I had known them ever since I was a boy. So when we got home, I thought, I'm going to have a little fun with my mother, because so every Sunday evening when we'd get home, Mother would always fix hot chocolate or coffee and sandwiches and cake or whatever. And while Mommy was going about fixing the sandwiches, and I said to her, I said, "Mom, I want to ask you something. Tonight when Pastor Brumfield was preaching, who were the wicked?" I said, "Mommy, I knew every person in that church, and I don't know anybody there was a wicked." So she came over and she said to me, "Lyle, in the Bible, there are only two classes of people, the righteous and the wicked." She says, "Are you righteous?" And I thought to myself, my own mother's calling me wicked. But when I got to myself that night, I thought, I know I'm not righteous. I could tell in the locker room with the football players, I could tell the shadiest story, and my language was not good. Many things that even though I never really had thought of it before, but the very fact that my mother awakened that, I realized there was a need there, but I didn't know what to do about it, because I thought, well, I go to church, I sing in the choir, I teach a Sunday school class, but I'm not righteous. And I went to, well, I was a sophomore in high school, and when it came to my junior year, I didn't have the funds to go my junior year. So this was during the Depression. This was in 1934. And one of the ladies that was a very good friend to my mother, she said, "Lyle, have you thought about going into this government program, the Civilian Conservation Corps?" So I hadn't thought of it, but I thought rather than to be just no work, so I looked into it, and I went down and got a physical, and right away there were 22 of us that went from Warren County, and we finally were in Oregon. It was in Oregon from actually from April until October, and then in October I came back to Monmouth. And one of the first nights after I came back, I got a letter from Eva. She was in Chicago, going to Northwestern University, and she related how on a Sunday evening that she had listened to a group of young people, brethren, young people, and she had become interested, and the next day she went to a service at the Brethren Chapel, and as a result of it, she had given her heart to the Lord, and she was praying for me. Well, just a short time after that, I was invited to a Bible class just across the lot from our house, over to a family that I knew very well. They had been very close to me years before that, when I had my leg broken. And I thought, well, I knew what kind of people they were. They weren't religious people, and they would not be, I would feel comfortable with them, because I thought, well, going to a Bible class, and I really felt a little bit as though I'd had college Bible, and I could go over there and I could really tell those people what the Bible was all about. But when I got over there, I found out I didn't even know the references, when the boy who was teaching the class was the same boy, Bill Crockett, that I had known in high school. I had never been close to him, but he was teaching the class, and he was teaching the class on the second coming of Christ. I had never heard of it. So I thought it was a sort of a heresy. But nevertheless, after the class, as I was in the kitchen with Mrs. Rutledge making donuts, and she was frying them in the deep fat, and I was taking them out of the fat and putting them in a sack of powdered sugar and shaking them up and laying them out on a paper. And one of the neighbors came in. Her name was Ella Mullaney, and I knew what kind of a reputation that Ella had, not a very good reputation, and I thought, I wonder what Ella's doing in a Bible class. But she was the kind of person that she was so big-hearted that if anybody in the neighborhood got sick or any of the children were sick, she'd be the first one there to take care of the members of the family and bring in food and just take care of the family. And she was sitting right around in the living room, and I was in the kitchen, and Bill Crockett came and sat down right between us, really, and he was talking to Ella, and he said, Ella, when are you going to become a Christian? And she said, oh, Bill, you know my life. I'd have too many things to give up to become a Christian. And he said, Ella, if you gave up one thing to become a Christian, you'd be trying to buy something that God doesn't have to sell. It's a gift. And he quoted Romans 6:23. He said, the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. It was almost just like the Lord took scales from my eyes, because I thought, from the time my mother had awakened that in me, that I was not righteous. I knew there was something missing. That's what was missing in my life, is I had never questioned God's existence. I had never questioned God's goodness, or that Jesus died, but I had never realized that he died for me. And so that night I realized that what I had been doing, singing in the choir and teaching a Sunday school class and trying to be what I thought was a Christian, I was trying to buy what Jesus had already bought, and all he wanted me to do was just reach out and receive it. And so that night when I got out under the old arc light there and read that passage out of the Bible. And then when I got home, I knelt down. I told the Lord I didn't know what it meant, but I knew I wasn't righteous. I wanted to be righteous.
What about you, Grandma?
Tell them about the brethren when you were staying at Agnes.
What do you want me to tell you?
About
At Agnes.
how you became a Christian.
Is that what you want me to tell you? How I became a Christian? Huh? Well, Daddy, yes, Warner. Well, you started way back before then. I didn't know where to start. Well, I remember when in college, I used to give readings, believe it or not.
What kind of readings?
Oh, I did readings for
The highwayman.
Oh, yes, the highwayman. And I gave a lot of Edgar Allan Poe's readings, you know, those things. And I like public speaking. And you can see that I like speaking in public. So, anyway.
Giving that up.
No, I've never given that up. But I remember at one time getting very sick. I worked my way much through college. And I worked in different homes. I worked in superintendent's school home, Roy Featherston, in Monmouth. He was a superintendent. And then I went in another home, parish's home. And I helped that lady for quite a long time. And they were an awful, difficult family. I remember getting sick one time, and I was a little fearful because I felt very sick, and I didn't have anyone to turn to. And I remember praying, getting down on my knees and really praying and asking God to help me. But I didn't know the Lord. I just was very conscious of God. I always believed in God and the Father, and I had a great reverence for God. I always did have. I never liked to take the Lord's name in vain or swear. We never did that. Mother never let us do that, and I didn't like it. I didn't like dirty jokes or things like that. I never did, all through my life. And I had a very strong conscience that bothered me many times. And so I was conscious of right and wrong very strongly. And when I was graduated from Monmouth, there were many things that happened in my senior year that were very difficult. Life was not just all roses. It was very difficult. Our home burned, and there was a great loss there, and there were things in the family that caused me deep concern. So when I went to Chicago that summer to look into going to Northwestern, I had a scholarship to go to a Medill School of Journalism, Northwestern. It was on Chicago Avenue down by Michigan. And I went there, and I stayed with my aunt, Agnes, who was Norwegian. Her husband was Japanese, and they were very strong Lutheran people. She wanted me to go up to her Lutheran church a couple blocks up the street from them. And I had gone there a few times, a little Lutheran church. But then one Saturday night I went downtown with my cousin Isabel. And we were just out for a good time that evening. And I think we'd probably gone to the show. I don't remember just all we had done. But anyway, as we were walking down the main street of Addison in Irving Park there was a group of young people across the street. And I had seen in Marshalltown, my hometown in Iowa, many times, the Salvation Army group playing and singing with their little hoods and hats on. And I enjoyed their music. I always liked good Christian music. When I heard these young people singing, and then they were talking, and I was curious, and I wanted to know what they were talking about. And I said, Isabel, come on, let's go over and see what they're talking about. She said, Eva, you're not going over there. And I said, yeah, I want to go over there. She said, no, come on. She said, don't go over there and make a fool of yourself. She said, I'm going home. And I said, okay, you go on home. I'm going over there. And so I went over. And a young lady came up to me. She said, are you born again? And I said, what? And she said, are you born again? And I said, honey, you don't know that until you die. She said, are you saved? And I said, no. I said, how do you know? You can't know that until you die. And so right away she knew she had a fish on the hook. And she went for her mother. Wasn't her name Helen? Helen. And her name, she worked down at Marshall Field. And so then her mother came over. Her mother is a very sweet, motherly lady, very nice. And she started talking to me and invited me to a group meeting the next day. I had listened to those young people just for a few minutes. I came in at the end of their program, and I heard them say that Jesus Christ had washed the mother's sin and cleansed them. And I never heard anyone talk like that. And I never heard anyone speak of him as a personal savior. That was real new to me. And I was intrigued, and I'm sure it was the Holy Spirit drawing me. I didn't know what it was, but Mrs. Hahn was very kind. And she invited me to the meeting the next day. She said they had a young doctor from Canada that was going to be the speaker. He was working with the high schools in Chicago. So I said yes, I would come, and they would pick me up at a certain time. So when I went home to Aunt Agnes said, oh no, you don't go out with strangers. you can't go there in a strange place. She said, what's wrong with going up to the Lutheran church here? And so I was her guest, and I said, well, okay, Aunt Agnes, I'll go on up to the Lutheran church then. And I got ready about 15 minutes early, and I intended to go up to the Lutheran church. But just as I came down the front steps of Aunt Agnes's home, here are these people from the Irving Park Gospel Hall just pulled right up, and I just stepped in their car, and away I went to the Irving Park Gospel Hall. They were there 15 minutes early, and I was leaving 15 minutes early, but I went to the Irving Park Gospel Hall. There was a young man there. His name, I think, was Humphreys, wasn't it, Daddy? And he was very, very good, very fine. But when I went in the Sunday school room, the one thing I never forgot was the impression it made on me. There was a Jewish man standing up in the Sunday school class, and he was witnessing. I didn't know what that was then, but he was witnessing how he had been a testimony to someone in his store, how he had been witnessing. And I thought as I went in there, now I knew quite a bit about basic beliefs and different comparative religions. I learned all that in college, so I felt pretty well informed, but I'd never seen that type of personal testimony. And I thought to myself, this is the way I think the disciples would have gathered. They all had a Bible. They were all very reverent, very quiet, and they were happy. And I was just impressed. I didn't know what it was. But then I went to the service, and I sat in the outer ring. I wasn't allowed down with the group. You know, you sit in the outer ring. So I sat in it. And then one of the ladies in the church, very nice, came over and invited me to dinner. And I said, Mrs. Johnson. And I said, well, I didn't know whether I could go because I'd have to call. I called Aunt Agnes, and she reluctantly let me go to dinner. And I went to dinner there to Mrs. Johnson. And they were out at, what, that little store? It wasn't Naperville, was it, Daddy? It was another
I don't remember.
Another little town out there. She had a mercantile store, general merchandise. It was a nice, clean, long, white store, and they lived in the back of it. And she had several children, quite a few little children. And after dinner was over, she let me go back in the sun porch in the end of the house, and there was a nice couch there, and told me that I should rest and then plan to go with them to the evening service. So she put some tracts down by me, but I was just too sleepy. I didn't pay much attention to them. And then the evening I went again, and I didn't get much out of it, but I was very uncomfortable. I felt it was very strange to me, and I didn't understand it. And so that week I went home to Aunt Agnes's, and I just didn't sleep. I didn't sleep at all. I just tossed, and I had those tracts, and I read those tracts, and I didn't understand them at all. But they bothered me, and I couldn't sleep. And then the next Sunday, the same thing was repeated. Went back to the Gospel Hall, and he preached, and I felt like it was just something that was strange. And I didn't understand why I couldn't understand it, but I didn't. And afterward, I went to Miss Johnson's again, and we had a dinner as we had the previous Sunday, and I sat on the couch in the back of the home, and nice sun, and went to sleep. And in the evening, they had a youth meeting, and they had a potluck dinner, and so she wanted me to go, and I did go. We had a potluck dinner before, and I remember I had a cape, and it matched my dress. It was one of my graduation dresses, and I had a big floppy hat, and I went in. Then I put my cape in the basement, and I went up and sat on the outer shell of the Brethren place and listened to his message. And he preached out Isaiah 53. All we like sheep have gone astray. We turned everyone to his own way. But the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. And the more he talked, the more I thought someone had told him about me. I was so positive that someone had told that speaker about me, because it was directed right to me. And everything he said was so true. And how did he know it? And I was becoming very angry, very indignant. I was very proud, because he talked about pride as being one of the great sins, of being so proud. And everything he said, it just fit me so well. And so then he talked about John 3:16, and that for God so loved Eva. And he made it very personal. And all the way through, his plan of salvation was so pointed, and I was becoming more uncomfortable and almost irritated with him. And I was so glad when the meeting was over. And I felt very miserable, very miserable. And I felt very, very lonely, and just like something was terribly wrong. And he stood at the door as we went out, and I had to go down in the basement to get my cape. And as he stood at the door to shake the hands of people, he reached out his hand to shake my hand, and I flipped it down. I hit him. I just kind of flipped his hand down, and I was ready to cry. I didn't know what was wrong with me. But anyway, I walked down the basement, and he had followed me down, and he put his hand on my shoulder. And I remember so well thinking, if he had said anything else than what he had said, I probably wouldn't have been saved. But he was so kind, and there was such a love there, and humility. And he said, "Sister, wouldn't you like to be saved?" And I just looked at him, and I started crying. And I said, "Yes, I would." And I didn't know what it was, but I knew that something I had to have, and there was something missing in my life. And so we went into a prayer room there in the basement, and I remember he talked to me about the love of God and how Christ had died for me. And he read me John 3:16. I really believe he read it 15 times. He put my name in it, and he read it, and he read it. And still I didn't see it. I couldn't see that Christ died for me. And it was just then suddenly, and he read it so many times, and we had prayed together, and he had prayed, and then all of a sudden it was true. It was very true. It was just like a light broke on me. It was just like a beautiful light came, like maybe God took the shade away from my eyes, and I saw it, and I started crying. And I cried, and I cried hard. And I knew things were changed. I was different. I didn't understand it, but I knew I was different. And I also had a sense of real perception. That I knew right instantly that old things would pass away and all things would become new. Although I didn't know scripture for them, I knew that was going to happen. I knew certain things that I was doing then and my plans for the future, I knew they were going to change. And so then after that, they had a reception at Mrs. Hahn's house in the basement, and all the young people were there, and I was most uncomfortable because I just wanted to be alone.
Helicopters surprised at night an entire Iraqi battalion, and the shock effect of their firepower coming at night from such a surprise position was enough to cause them all to surrender. That technology...
Okay, Grandma, I don't know whether I'm recording over it. See, it starts... I don't know, how do you know?
You didn't rewind, did you, honey?
No.
Then it's not recording.
It started, it's showing in 0 on the deal up above.
First year of marriage was very eventful. We lived in a one little room apartment near Moody, and we were very, very happy because we've been going together for 5 to 6 years, and one reason I was very glad we were married because of the events preceding our marriage. When I was working, I went down to the Chicago office of Mickey Cohen to get a job, and he introduced me to some employers who hired me down at a law office as a proofreader, and then I went up to the Chicago Tribune to be interviewed for creative feature writing, and by going up there I followed behind a guard really, and I followed him into the press room, and the people there were so surprised, wondered how I got into the press room, because they were having a gang war then in Chicago between the press and the gangsters. And through those two things, I was having complications with those parties. I went to church one morning and was introduced to 4 young pastors up at Moody Church, and a young lady introduced me. Then as I started down Clark Street as going to meet Daddy, he hadn't felt well that morning and hadn't come to church, so I was going to meet him down on LaSalle. And when I was walking along here, this big black limousine pulled up, and one of the men in the front had a gun on his lap, and he ordered me into the car, and I just turned on my heel and got back into the crowd on Clark Street. And then farther on down Clark Street, I just happened to catch a glimpse of this limousine pulling out in front of me, and I felt like, they were going to pull me in the car, and I just turned quickly and ran over to Chicago, over to LaSalle Boulevard. But all this time, I knew the Lord was taking care of me. I wasn't afraid. When I was with Mickey Cohen, I gave him my testimony, how I came to know the Lord as my Savior. And he listened very politely, and he was very interested. And all that time, in different incidents, and I could tell you a number of other incidents that happened, I knew that I wanted to get married and have Daddy, so we would be together, and I really wasn't afraid, but then I felt more secure with Lyle. And so we were married up in the missionary room at Moody Memorial Church, and just because, we were married in the missionary room didn't mean that our kids would be missionaries, or because a cat has kittens in the oven, it just doesn't make them biscuits. But just the same, we had a nice little ceremony, and it was between classes at Moody, and it was wonderful because at that time I was having a real hard time with Daddy. He was kind of dragging his feet. I knew the Lord wanted us at Moody, and God had already showed me that He didn't want me in that radio script class up at Medill campus. And I knew God was leading me to Moody, and I was hungry to know more about the Word of God. But I was having a little difficulty with getting Daddy to be as hungry for the Word of God. So we just prayed. And so little by little, why the Lord led us, and by the personal work down at Cook County Hospital, Cook County Jail, different things like that, why Daddy started coming then to Moody in the evening, and it was wonderful. And it was pretty soon he was enrolled as a student. So that first year of marriage was very eventful. We moved from that one-room apartment up to the 900 building on LaSalle, and that was where many of the Moody students were. So we got acquainted with more Christian couples, and we had a fellowship there that we hadn't had before. And then one evening, one incident I'll tell you about was one of the girls came running up to us one evening, and she said, Eva, she said, I want you to come because Faustina tried to kill herself. And Faustina was one of the girls in our first apartment building. And my former roommate, Ernestine, had gone to live with them. And those two girls were living in the world, and they were living lives that weren't very good, and I knew their life. So I went over to Faustina, and I prayed with her and asked her, and she revealed to me that she had a baby, and that the baby had been taken by the father's folks. And on the stipulation that she couldn't see her baby, and she wanted to see the baby, she wanted to get to know the baby, and her heart was broken, and so she tried to take her life. But anyway, we pled with her, and Daddy and I, and on several occasions, we were able, God helped us right away to have a burden for our friends and to have a burden for our classmates and people we had met. And so we started praying, I think right from the beginning, Daddy and I. We started praying, and for his former boy friend there in Monmouth College. He was back at Columbia, wasn't it, Daddy? Where was he? Columbia University? And he was a young scientist. And we felt very much we should write to him and give him my testimony. And it was Jack Wirtz. And here, even while we were discussing and praying about it, we picked up a little article and saw in the paper that an explosion had occurred at Columbia University and he had been killed. And it made us feel terrible to think that we hadn't gotten to him sooner, and only Lord knows if, he really knew the Lord as his Savior. And so our first year of marriage was very eventful with many things like that, trying to reach people that we knew weren't Christians, and they were dear friends of ours and our family. And then that first year, after the second year, our son Lyle Jr. was born. He was born on Christmas Eve. There had been 3 of our friends, 2 of our Christian friends in the building, the Shannons and the Armstrongs. And previous to the birth of Lyle Jr., both of those wives had died. They died at childbirth. And so when I went in, there was quite a bit of prayer, and I got staph infection from the delivery. I was in labor 23 hours, and it was, I could tell you a long story about that. Daddy could tell you better. But it was an eventful thing, how God really brought us through, and he was beginning to show his keeping power. And we, the morning when I looked at Sonny, I thought he looked like Mahatma Gandhi, and it was a cross between him and Haile Selassie. And it scared us, And so, but somehow, God was very real, and we knew that Sonny would be all right. Well, I was unconscious from Christmas Day until New Year. Every evening I'd float out over the city of Chicago. Then when I came back finally, the intern was sitting there by me, and a little nurse was holding my hand when I came to about a week, 5 or 7 days later, and she said, "Oh, you're awake," and I said, "Yes, I'm awake." And so she ran in to get the resident doctor, whoever was taking care of me. They had put me in isolation and covered everything with sheets. So while she was out, I reached over and picked up a Christian Workers New Testament I had, and I just asked the Lord, just show me, am I going to live? And I knew that I'd been very ill. I didn't know what God's will was for me. And the verse that he gave me was, "Be it known unto you, men and brethren, by this man Jesus Christ is this impotent man made whole." And I said, "Thank you, Lord, that's good enough for me," because I knew God was telling me that I was going to be well. And so when the resident doctor came in, he said, "You're feeling better?" And I said, "Yes." I said, "I'm going to be fine." And he said, "And how do you know that?" And so I read him the verse from Acts. And then after that, God led us to think of coming to Colorado. And about that time, we were expecting Jackie. And Jackie...
what year was that, Grandma?
Well, I think that was about 1940. And we were going to come to Colorado with the Rocky Mountain Mission Group. We didn't have any support. We hadn't solicited any support. We're coming strictly on faith, knowing that God wanted us here. We were very happy about it. We came with Bob Swanson and Ken Piercy was the one that drove, wasn't it? Drove the car, and his brother. We came to Buena Vista and settled there in Buena Vista.
You just tell about the children.
Yeah, Grandma, why don't you just give it to the kids
And
the
then
highlights, who they were and everything.
we were in Buena Vista, and then took the place. When we were in Peyton, Mary was, Sissie was born, and that was quite an event. We went to the hospital about 80 miles an hour and got there 15 minutes before she was born. She had the cord wrapped around her neck 8 times. She was pretty dark. She looked like one of the prize fighters, but God was very merciful to us. And then later, when we were up in Yampa, Mary Kay came to be in our home, and she's a very precious little girl, just a premature baby. And there again, God showed His power by keeping her. It was just miraculous how the Lord, there was an event there I haven't told too many people, but I'll tell you because you're my children. It was a dry birth, and it was very painful, so I went into sort of a coma, and also while the baby was being delivered, I started going into, what do you call it, not seizures, but convulsions. And I had a young doctor who was captain of the football team from Minnesota. He was a big, husky, good, strong doctor, Dr. Lindell. And but while I was there and Mary was being delivered, it was as if I was outside my body, and I was looking down on my body, and I was listening to myself talk, and I was seeing like a great war and great judgment. And I said, Dr. Lindell, you will have to stand before the judgment seat of Christ. And I heard myself saying that to him. And he said, well, Eva, he says, now you're a good person. You answer for me. And I said, oh, no, doctor, I can't answer for you, for we must all give an account of ourselves unto God. And so you have to answer for yourself. Well, I had never witnessed to Dr. Lindell. So afterward, he asked Daddy if Daddy had taken notes on my sermon. But when I started going into convulsions, I remember, and I thank God for His big, strong hand, because He gave me a hit that really snapped my body and whatever it was floating around outside together, and I came together. But I mean, He really hit me hard. He really gave me a swat. So anyway, little Mary was very precious. We had a little time with her because she was premature, and she had, mucus in her that caused choking at one time. We had to rush her to the hospital. And then later, when we were in, Dickie was in Salida. And there again, we had such a time that time before Dickie's birth. There was a lovely lady from Flagler that came and papered for us and helped me so much. When Dickie was due to be born, we had Dr. Smith, and he was drinking quite heavily, but he's a very good doctor, and we appreciate him so much. And when Dickie was born, Mary was in the hospital with pneumonia, a complication of measles and chickenpox, and it was a very trying time. But I went upstairs, and there again, it was a very difficult birth. But and I got staph infection again, and so then it was lying in bed there for a week or so, and seeing the ceiling coming and going, and all the beautiful colors of the gates of heaven, and it was like I was seeing the psychedelic color, I was seeing all those colors, and I'm sure it was from the toxic poisoning, and woke up to see one of my friends sitting in a chair by the door. But that was a very trying period too. But Dickie was very precious, a baby. He was a good baby. He was with the best baby that we ever had. He was the most perfect baby. He had a beautiful skin and a beautiful head, and I never had to worry about dirty diapers with Dick. He was as regular as a clock, and I just never had a baby as good to eat or anything. And to bathe, he was just perfect. And so, but he was a very willful little boy, and everybody loved him. And he was very much of a man right from the time he was a little boy. When one lady offered him some flowers, he said one Sunday, he looked up at that lady and he says, "I'm not a lady." He wouldn't take the flowers. And Dick was always very much of a little gentleman. Then later, when we were in Denver, we had David and Jonathan. And David and Jonathan were born at the St. Luke's Hospital. And they were born just a year and a half apart. But what?
2 years.
2 years apart.
Just one day.
2 years and 1 day, yeah. If they had been born a few minutes earlier or later, they would have been born on the same day, 15th and 16th. And the birth was not that difficult with David and Johnny. I went through a very strange process there before those two babies were born. I'll tell you, one of the committees of the Bethel Church came to me and said, "Mrs. Abbott, you have 5 beautiful children. Why endanger your life having any more children?" Well, I prayed about it. And I was just simple enough to believe that if God is God, He's God of all. If He's my Lord at all, He's God of all. And I believe that. And I believe that God had the right to set the number of children in our family and to be control whether we had so many children. And I believe that. And I was glad I believed it, because these ladies were, with their good intention, were trying to dissuade me. I had every reason, and I could have used it as an excuse for not having children. It would have been the easy way out, because with 5 children was plenty of work. But I just didn't ever have the peace in my heart that that was God's will. And then, I've known that now. I've seen it over 100 times that it was God's will for Jonathan and David to be born. And we could never have carried on the work in Aspen if it hadn't been for Johnny and David. Because although we weren't old, yet there was so much manual labor there. It was like starting a new church, to build up that church from scratch. There was much manual labor, cleaning, shoveling snow, and cooking, and taking care of all the visitors, and all the runaway children, and all the people God sent us. I couldn't have done it without David's help in cooking and Johnny in cleaning. The only thing about Johnny when he was cleaning, I have to tell you this real quickly, he was a good cleaner and he kept everything so tidy. But when I went into my bedroom, I had sack upon sack full of the stuff he had picked up from all around the house. And I usually had bags of brown bags, and then I had to take care of that. But otherwise, I really appreciated it.
Okay, Papa.
Was that okay, Leigh?
That's fine. Just describe, your transition from pastoring different churches.
Yeah. Okay. I'll start. When we were students at Moody, we had been corresponding with Bob Swanson at Buena Vista, Colorado, for several months, and so when we graduated in August of 1940, we had already been accepted, and so we just 1 month after our graduation in September, 1st of September, we left and came to Buena Vista. And we really, there was Mom and Sonny, who was 2.5, and Jack was 6 weeks old. And we came with Kenneth Piercy and his brother Jack Piercy from Canada. And we left on Saturday morning from the 1st of September, and we got into Buena Vista Sunday evening, the evening before Labor Day. So actually Labor Day was our first day in Buena Vista in Colorado. And there are many events that we could think of, but we were there from September, and we served with Bob Swanson and Fred Rudy and Charlotte Jupe, and it was called the Yale Hotel. And we went from, on Monday evening, we went to Jefferson over in South Park. Tuesday evening we went to Granite. Wednesday evening we went to Hartselle. Thursday evening we went to Como. And then Friday evening we had Boys and Girls Club. And then Saturday it was a day for study and getting ready for Sunday. Sunday morning we went to Maysville for Sunday school and church. And then we went from Maysville to Villa Grove for service in the early afternoon. And then when we left Villa Grove, we came to Salida and had a service in the Odd Fellows Hall at 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
For soldiers.
Then,
For soldiers.
yes. Then in the evening, we went back to Buena Vista and had a evening service in our home there at the Yale Hotel. And we served there until March.
That was all on Sunday? That
Yeah.
was, and how many miles did that encompass?
Well, we've had 550 miles a week.
And what year was that?
It was in 1940, September of 40 to March of 1941. And in about February of 41, we were over at Jefferson one night, and the American Sunday School Union missionary asked if there would be any of our group that would like to think of pastoring a church. And Mommy and I had been praying about going out on our own because it was a little difficult with our 2 little children, and Mommy was responsible for the cooking, the washing, the really taking care of all of the people that working in the mission. So we'd been praying, and so I told Mr. Perry that I would be interested, and I would if I could just tell whom to contact. So they said, well, I can tell you that they are looking for a man to come down there on the 16th of March. And so when we came back to Buena Vista, I asked Sam Carpenter, who was our mechanic and kind of a father confessor, and just really a help to us in many ways, if he knew how I could catch a bus going into Peyton, which was that little town that was looking for a pastor. It was about 24 miles out of east of Colorado Springs. And he said, well, yeah, you could catch a bus here and go to Colorado Springs and then probably transfer there and go to Peyton. Later on that afternoon, he came and he said, Lyle, my wife and I have been talking about this and praying about it, and we thought maybe we would go over with you when you go over the 16th of March, because that's where we came from, was Peyton, and we lost one of our little boys there during a polio epidemic, and we would like to go down and sort of take care of his grave and meet some of the people. So when I went down with them, it was just like a local boy coming home to go in with the carpenters. And so the church had been without a pastor for 7 months. It was only just a very small church, but
Pretty.
the people there were very, very loving. And the thing about the Peyton Church was, even though we're a Baptist church, it had been organized back in 1908 as a Baptist church. But in the meantime, most of the Baptist families had moved away. So about all their, as we think of the congregation there in that Peyton Baptist Church at that time, were Methodists and Presbyterians and Episcopalians and Catholic. We only had 2 families that were Baptist. And when they would meet, they would say at the close of the meeting, now today we're going to have a meeting of the board and all others will be excused. And it seemed like a strange thing to me that here these people were coming to church. Many of them wanted to really become a part of that fellowship, and they were supporting it, but they had no voice in it. So I really questioned. I talked to Mr. Townsend and Mr. Harding about it, and they said, well, probably fair, because not only do they take a collection on Sunday, but they go around many times during the week and take offerings from the people. So what they decided that they would have associate membership, and there were many of those people. They felt this was good because they were allowed to vote. They were permitted to vote on the business. It was just as though they were full members. They were really good Christian people. One of the requirements there was that they had to be born again. They had to be come by baptism by immersion, and many of those people came into the church, and it really made a better situation. We were there until
The war.
well, until actually April of 1942. Eva's brother Harold was drafted into the Merchant Marines and it was during World War II. And Bud had requested that maybe it would be possible for us to come back and to take care of Mrs. Swedberg, and at the same time I could probably continue my schooling by going to Bethel Seminary. So we prayed about it, and we felt that was the thing to do. And so in April of 1942 we did take our family and go back to Minnesota. And I went up and enrolled in Bethel. But just after we were there a week, Mommy got lobar pneumonia. And she was very, very ill from that time in April until August. So we were there. But I'd have to say how the Lord directed us and blessed us while we were there. Well, several times the doctor had said, your wife cannot possibly live till morning. But the Lord healed Mom. And at one time she had fluid on the lung. And after she had sort of recovered from pneumonia, then she started running a high fever. And so the doctor would come going from his office in Waterville to Faribault. He would stop at our house to see Mommy.
51 times.
Yeah, 51, right. 51 calls that he made during that summer. And when he took her temperature, he said, how's Mom doing? I said, well, I think she's running a fever. So he took her temperature and he said she is. He said, tomorrow I will have to take her into the university hospital and take that fluid off her lung. So Mom said, Daddy, I don't want to leave the children. I don't want to go into Minneapolis to that hospital. Why don't you go and call some of our friends and have them pray? I didn't even have a dime for a telephone call, so I just went down the road and I got out and I prayed, and I came back and told Mom I didn't have I couldn't, but we'll pray. So when the doctor came the next morning, I thought sure he would say, well, there's only one thing that we can do. But as he was coming out of the car, I said, my wife really would prefer if there's some way that we could take that fluid off her lung here. And he said, well, he said, sometimes I've taken people to the hospital and I have tried to get the fluid from their lung and didn't have any success, and then to go home and immediately the Lord directed me where the fluid was, and so he said, if that's what your wife would want, you just tell your mother-in-law to get plenty of hot water and we'll do it here. So we got everything ready, and he tapped and he said, I'm sure I know where it is. And of course, this kind of a thing is not a thing of beauty to look at, because you have a huge needle affair, and then I stood and held Mommy, and he took
3 pints.
3 pints of fluid from the lungs, and he finally said to Mother, he says, what have you been drinking? It looked just like beer. It did have a head on it. It looked just like beer. And then immediately Mommy started getting better. And then when she did get, so she could get up and around, he came one day and he said, you know, I've been thinking about you people, and now I want to make a suggestion to you that I think probably it would be best if you went back to Colorado. I could have kissed him. But again, we didn't have any money. We didn't have a dime, because there was no work there, and taking care of Sonny and Jack and Sis and Mommy. So we prayed, now Lord, just make it possible that I can get something to do here and earn enough to get back to Colorado. So when we were at the and Mrs. Swedberg said, Carl wants to talk to you, so I went to the phone and he said, Lyle, how'd you like to go back to Colorado? Here the doctor had just suggested it, and we've been praying about it that day and here, so immediately that night, and I almost cried on the phone because I thought, how could that happen? He said, my company is transferring me to Canyon City, Colorado, and what I'd like to have you do is go along to drive for us, and we'll pay all your expenses. So we left on a Wednesday morning from Fairmont, and went through South Dakota, Badlands, and up through the Black Hills, and then finally got into Colorado, well, got into Denver on Friday afternoon, and Carl wanted to take his boss out to dinner. And we had been in Denver a few times, enough to know one of the best restaurants wasn't an expensive restaurant, was the Blue Spruce. And so he said, do you know of a good restaurant right close by? And I said, yes, I think the best right here is the Blue Spruce. And he looked at it, he said, no, he said, I'll tell you, I think I want to take the boss to the steakhouse. And I told him, I said, Carl, it's going to cost you an arm and a leg. Oh, he said, this is my boss. So this was back in 1942, but even then, of course, it wasn't that bad, but for Carl and Rachel and their two little girls and myself and their boss, it was something like $60. And Carl just cursed and raved all the way home about getting stabbed for one meal. But anyway, we finally went out. Then the next day we went to Colorado Springs, and I went into a place that I knew Mr. McCann, who was the boss of the city transfer in Colorado Springs. It was during the war. So I asked him, I said, Mac, could you use help? He said, you got your overalls with you? And I said, yes. He said, get them on, because we were looking for somebody to help us move, and so I went immediately to work. And I worked in Colorado Springs for 6 weeks. No, I was planning on working 6 weeks. I went to work there on Friday afternoon, and then I worked until the next Friday morning, and I went out for coffee across the street, and while I was in the coffee shop, there was a young fellow there that we had known. His name was Ben Carmen, and his parents were in our church when we were at Peyton, and so he asked me what the situation was, and I told him that we were working to just get enough to go back to Minnesota to pick up the family. So he left and came back, and he handed me a little envelope with $80 in it. He said, now Lyle, my wife and I we've been really saving our tithe, and we would like to give you this toward going back. Well, when I went back over to Max, he said, there's a man here that's looking for a driver, and his name was Jacob Arndt, or Jacob Amen, that's what he meant, A-M-E-N-D, Jacob Amen. And I asked him where he was going. He said, well, I have to take a load of furniture from here, from Colorado Springs, down to Amarillo. And then from Amarillo, I have to take a officer's furniture from there to Lincoln, Nebraska. And I said, how far is that from Fairmont, Minnesota? He said, about 100 miles. I said, you got a driver. So, because he paid me $200 and paid all my expenses. So then you see I got back, they didn't even know I was coming. I drove in with the car, and the kids, they couldn't believe that here I was with the car, and Mom.
I knew you were coming.
And
because I've been on my knees most of the night. I was starting the temperature again.
So we left, we loaded up and left, and we got as far as Columbus, Nebraska, and Mommy got sick.
I was starting to
And
collect
so we had
food.
to stay there. I don't remember how many, 3 or 4 nights, and all we had left was $20. So when we got out, in fact, I was spending we stopped in Phillipsburg, Kansas, and while we were there, getting gas, a man came up and he said, where are you going? I said, well, I'm going toward Colorado Springs. He said, could I bum a ride with you? I brought a truck over here today, and I need to get a ride to Colby. So he hadn't slept all night, so he said, I'm not going to be very much of a traveler because I'll probably sleep all the way. And I told him, well, we just let him sit in the front seat and he could just stretch out. And the car we had was a 34 Plymouth. It was like a tank, but it was very, very comfortable riding. So as we were going along, he said, what's your business? And I told him we were in a ministry, and we didn't say anything to him about we were broke. But when he got out of the car in Colby, he handed me a $20 bill. He said, I know this is not payment for, but he said it means this much to me. He didn't know how much it meant to us, because that was the only way we could get on into Colorado Springs. And we got into Colorado Springs, and there was a family that lived outside of Peyton, Jim and Margaret Barber. They were elderly people. Well, that is, Jim was several years older than Margaret, but they thought maybe we had come back to the church, but there's no way we could have gone to that church, to stay there. So we just told them right off the bat that it was going to be impossible for us to take the church again. But they said, well, while you're in between whatever you're doing, you come and stay with us. So we lived with Mr. and Mrs. Barber.
You were.
I have to tell you something. They were both wonderful people. Mrs. Barber, one morning when I was backing the car out to go to work, Sonny's little kiddie car was behind the car and I didn't see it, and I ran over it. And Sonny, he just cried like his heart was broken, and Mrs. Barber came out and she said, boy, your dad really demoralized the car.
She always tried to use big words.
She was trying to say demolish, but she said, oh, your dad really demoralized that car. And, one evening we were there, and Mr. Barber wasn't feeling well, so their doctor was in Colorado Springs, and Mrs. Barber felt that it was necessary to call to get some kind of a prescription, some medicine for Jim. So when she came back in there, why, Jim was saying, well, did you tell him what my problem is? She said yes, and he diagnosed your case. Instead of saying diagnose, she says he died. So we knew something.
Malapropism.
And so then, while we were there, we'd only been back just a little while, but we'd been praying that the Lord somehow would let us get into the mountains, get away from the dust. So that next Saturday morning, no, it was on a Friday, we got a call from a lady in Colorado Springs, and she said, my son Jim, Caden, had written back to Moody for a possibility of some church being open in Colorado, and they recommended that he would go to Yampa this next Sunday to candidate. But she said, Lyle, he just accepted a church in Edgar, Nebraska, so could you go up there and candidate for him? So I said, sure. So we'd never been up in that part of the country, but we got in the car and got up there about 4:30 in the afternoon. on Saturday afternoon, and we were given the name of Bertha Trantham. So we went to Bertha Trantham's, and she said, I don't have the key, but Dr. Mayo lives right across from the church. He has the key. So we went over and saw Dr. Mayo, and he let us into the parsonage. And by the way, the ladies of the church had just completely painted and remodeled the parsonage. So it was really very well it was in good shape. And the only thing it was, didn't have a bathroom. And Dr. Mayo, kind of the head of the board, he had gone up in one of the bedrooms upstairs, and he put a stool in, and that's all the bathroom there was. And he had, it was right in front of one of the large windows. So when he took us up and showed us, he said, he said you can look down the whole valley.
You could.
It said, yes,
Community
Mother said, yes, the whole valley can look back at you.
There was no shade on the window?
No, there was nothing. So the ladies of the church, when they found this out, they came over and they told him, he said, you're going to have to get that out of there. Just move it. So what he did, he had a 1x2 with one of these old wooden flushing tanks. He had a 1x2 that he had nailed on the top of this flushing tank and over on the windowsill. So what he did, he went over and just took a saw and cut the board out of the windowsill.
Yes.
It just left that. But anyway, the Lord blessed us, and we put in the bathroom. Not only did we, when we first came in the little parsonage, there was a little closet just in the entryway, and so Mommy and I looked at that, and what we finally decided we'd do would take that wall out, and we could make a bathroom there where that room was, and put a part in the kitchen. That is, we could. We had a kitchen stove that came right up against that. It was one of these old wood burning, and it had a water jacket in it. And one of the men in the church, Mr. Bird, came over and he said, Lyle, you could just hook a water tank right up to that water jacket and have all your hot water. It'll be for and for the bathroom too. So it worked out just very well. We have really a very good bathroom. One of the things that we had there, we'd been there a short time, and one night, it was about 9 o'clock on a Saturday night, and it was during a storm, and knocked at the door, and I went to the door and I saw this fellow, and I said to him, why, I know you, brother. I went to Moody with you. He said, praise the Lord takes care of his own. Here was his name was Podolak. He was a Polish fellow from Chicago. He had never been away from Chicago. He lived with his mother, and somebody had offered him a job out in Washington. He wasn't satisfied, and so he was hitchhiking home. And he got up in that Steamboat Springs area, and somebody offered him a ride from Steamboat out almost into Oak Creek. And that's very wild and rugged country there, and there he was, after dark. He said I could see a lion or a bear behind every tree. And finally, the farmer picked him up and brought him into Yampa. And the fellow told him, he said, now, there's only one place that I know, probably over at the bar, Mike's Tavern. So he went over to Mike's Tavern, and Mike said, now the only place in town you're going to be able to find a place to stay is over at the Preacher's. He lived right over there. So here he came to our house, and when I recognized him, I tell you what he felt. So Mom said to him, Mr. Podolek, would you like to take a bath? He said, oh, I'd love that. So he didn't realize we had a bathroom. Mom went out and she had one of these little buckets, little scrub buckets, and she started running water in that to scrub the kitchen floor. He thought that was going to, he says, oh no, he said, forget it, I don't really need it. Even after I told him that.
We could get so embarrassed.
He was terrible.
We couldn't get him to take a bath.
No way. But anyway, I called.
He was a calligrapher.
Yeah, he wrote all the
Beautiful.
Graduation certificates.
Mm-hmm.
That was his business, and that's what he did there in Chicago for those big businesses. Well, I called one of the men, Mr. Marjoram, and I asked him, I said, Elmer, do you know the next time you're going to be going into Denver? He said, I have to go in the first thing in the morning. So I said, I have a man here that would it be possible for him to ride in with you? He said, I'd love to have the company. So I went in and I told him, I said, you don't have any problem because when you get into Denver, you can catch a plane or you can catch a train or however you want to get back to Chicago. And he was so thankful. Of course, a lot of experiences we had there, but we stayed in Yampa until 1945. And Mr. Stedman, who was the state evangelist for Colorado, oftentimes came to our home. We had met him earlier, and he said, Lyle, I would like to have you do me a favor. We have a situation out at Flagler where we've been for a long time without a pastor, and even though we loved the people in Yampa, we really, the only thing was a drawback and a kind of a hindrance there. It was a community church, and every Easter they put great pressure on you to baptize their babies, and this was always hard for me. And one time I did it, but I was not happy about it, and even the people that had their baby baptized finally went to Steamboat Springs and had another, because I told them, I said, you don't want some old hypocrite baptizing your baby? And they said, no. I said, that's what I'd be if I did it. But I did. But my heart wasn't in it. I felt that I was only doing it as a compromise. And so when Mr. Stedman said, even though Mom and I felt, here we are going back out on the plains where it's the wind and the dust, so we thought, we told Mr. Stedman, we'll go there until we can get another mountain church where we feel that we can serve without compromise. So we went to Flagler in March of 1945, and then in November of 1945 we were invited to come to Salida as pastor. So I came in November of 1945, and it was a very difficult church. Not going to get into it was, at that time, it was a Northern Baptist church. The Northern Baptists were having a very hard time doctrinally, because they had permitted themselves to get into a situation where they challenged the deity of Christ and the authority of the Bible, even to the place where if you go to a minister's conference, we went to one minister's conference where the minister was giving the lesson for the week, and it was on comparative religions. And in his opening, it was at breakfast, right at the opening morning, had all the Baptist ministers from the state there, and he was saying, When Jesus was a boy, he was a zealot, and he had heard and he had been taught about the Messiah. By the time he was 33 years old, he was a raving maniac believing he was the Messiah. That's right. So we left. Everybody, with the exception of probably 4 or 5 ministers who really felt that that was acceptable, we left. And when I came back to the church in Salida, I told them how I felt. And many of the people there thought, for a long time we have really fought with this. Now I think it's time for us to withdraw from that Northern Baptist Convention. So in 1946, in the spring of 1946, the church voted to withdraw from the Northern Baptist Convention and join the Conservative Baptists. And I remember when Dr. Stedman came to me, and he said, Lyle, he said, I've been with the Northern Baptists. He said, I realize that they're having problems in this area of the deity of Christ and the authenticity of the Word of God. But he said, I think it's wrong for you to leave and go in, because it's only going to be a short time. They will be just the same as the Northern. They will be fighting among themselves. He said, I would advise you to stay in that church and just preach Christ and to forget all the mechanics of the denomination. Well, later I found that would have been a wise thing to do, that I didn't. And I went, and so while we were there, we had a very difficult, it was a difficult ministry, because not only with the Northern Baptist Convention, but before we came to Salida, there was a group of Southern Baptists that had become, well, they were the 2 men that were really in the church, that were the leaders, were deacons in the church. Well, because in the Southern Baptists, if you're ordained as a deacon, even though you're transferred to another church, you're still a deacon. And that's the way it was here. And so they were deacons, and they smoked, they drank, they would even take the Lord's name in the church. So it was difficult for me, even though my deacons, every one of the deacons said to me, well, we don't agree with this, but these men are leaders. They're very influential. We don't feel as though we should oppose them. So eventually, that situation, I had to leave. So in May of 1949, we left, and we went into Denver, and I took as associate pastor to Dr. Jack Spratt in the Judson Baptist Church in Denver, but it proved not to be a pastorate, but all he wanted was a custodian. So we were only there a very short time, and we left. We went out to
Weren't you close to a nervous breakdown there?
Close.
Yes,
Close. I couldn't. When I would sit down, I would just. I was trying as hard as I could. I couldn't keep from shaking, and I couldn't sleep. It was I thought it was the end.
It was a terrible spiritual battle
when we went to
in Salida. It was on the edge of a split, and it did split, when we left. Under the next pastor.
Another man
Cliff
came
Martin.
in the church split, and that's when they started the Temple Baptist Church.
And it was very devious, very difficult.
The Lord was good to me. There was a couple of years I fought this. I was very bitter. I felt the Lord let me down, because I felt
Because we worked hard. We had a funeral a week.
Well,
we worked awful hard. We had the largest youth group. We had all the churches.
Some of those.
It was very hard, very hard.
But anyway, I was very
There's not a
bitter.
fruit
I
out
didn't
there.
go to church for 2 years. I would take Mom and I'd take the children and I'd drive up in the mountains and drive around, and all the time inside I was eating my heart out, thinking that I had been, really the Lord forsook me. Because I had always felt that if a man preached the gospel and he really did what he thought was right, that the Lord would bless him. Well, in fact, there was one pastor that I knew my family thought a great deal of, and the name of Dr. Garberson. Little man, but he was very good and very warm. And so Mom never said anything. I know they were praying, and so one evening I thought, well, I'll go. And so I know he was preaching it for me, even though he didn't know it. But he was preaching. First, he preached on Peter in the 2nd chapter of Acts, and it says, and Peter stood up before the people, and he was full of the Holy Spirit, and he preached the word, and as a result of it, 3,000 souls were saved. And I thought, let's see, that's what I had always believed. If a man preached the gospel, that the Lord would bless, and that I thought. But then he said, now you think about that. But he said, now turn to the 7th chapter of Acts. He said, here was another man, Stephen, who was equally full of the Holy Spirit, and he also preached the word of God. They stoned him to death. So he said, the word of God does not say that a man is supposed to be successful, but he has to be faithful. See? And I thought, thank you. All these 2 years I'd been, I should have stayed. Because I had an opportunity just before we left. Some of the men came to me and said, Lyle, we can get the best of this thing, and we would like to have you stay. But I felt as though I was too far, so I left. But the Lord showed me something there. The Lord never failed, but I failed the Lord. I was looking for success, and the Lord does not say anything about success. He says, be faithful.
And those people have not grown in the Word since that time.
Anyway, Mother, this is not a commentary on.
That's true.
So
They're still in the same state as they were when we left.
That fall, I got a job at the Gates Rubber Company, and I worked there for 12 years, almost to the day. Well, in that year of 61, I was invited to come down to Walsh on the 3rd of July to speak.
Was it Elizabeth first? Elizabeth first.
Well, while we were at Gates, during the time I was at Gates, that's right. We pastored out. In fact, it was there
Until
3
we
years
paid off the
at
mortgage.
Elizabeth. We actually only went out there. These people said, if you'll just come out and help us take care of our mortgage, pay off our mortgage, because they were paying me $10 a week. And
So we paid $100 to
They
go.
didn't even pay for my transportation, but nevertheless, it was a good experience for us, because we
We're
realized
glad we did it.
there were
right,
people
right.
there that really needed, and we needed it. So it was a good experience for us. And then in 1961, I went down there to Walsh to preach, and they were just having meetings in a little schoolhouse. But there was another where there were people who really loved the Lord. They really loved the Word, and they wanted to. So the church grew, and we outgrew that schoolhouse in a little while, and they wanted. So then they voted to build a building, and we had a good man in the church, Glenn Lloyd, who was a builder, and so the people prayed, and they said, we've decided that we're going to build. And they asked Murray Landrum to be the head of the building committee, and asked certain ones there if they would draw in. In fact, Mr. Lloyd and his brother, and
Glenn.
well, of course, they weren't on the building committee, but
Did you have plans?
Glenn drew up the blueprint, the church, and right away Murray and the building committee, we started going. We went to Julesburg to see about getting beams for the church, and they were too expensive. So the next week we went down to Amarillo, and there we found a man that he already had beams made that would fit our specifications very well, and he would deliver them for a certain. So that's where we decided we would go with those beams. And then when we got back, we were thinking about other material that we're going to have. And so Glenn figured out what it would cost, and Murray said, that's too much. We can't go with that. So he said, I want you and Lyle to go into Denver on Friday morning, or it was the last part of the week, and just look around at some of those large lumber yards there and see if the Lord will. So the first thing we had breakfast, and we went out from breakfast and we went out into that University Hills area, and the lumber yard there, boy, the prices were, even this was back in '63, but the lumber was way out of line. So Glenn said, do you have any experience with any of these? I said, well, we built a home in South Denver, and there is a lumber yard down on Broadway, and we can go right down there. And so we went in and told the man what we wanted. We were looking for paneling, enough paneling for Glenn had it all, so he knew exactly to the sheet how much paneling we would need. And so this man says, we've been doing a little work on experimenting with some paneling here that we got. It's a kind of a honey color, and we'll sell it to you for $4 a sheet. Well, most of that had been, well, I think the cheapest was $18, and some of it was $30, $36. So we went and took a look at it, and it was, have you ever been in the Walsh Church? See? And so we said, boy, we went out and took a look at it. Boy, it was just what we were looking for. And then the doors and windows, everything. And then Glenn said, just as we were getting ready to go, he said, you don't happen by any means have a accordion door. That we're really, sooner or later, we're going to have to buy a door to divide the sanctuary from a little back room. We'll just use that for overflow. And so this fella, he said, we have an accordion door here, but it's not very tall, because a man came and he custom ordered this. We cut it for him, but when he came to see it, it was 1.5 feet too short, so he can't use it. So we went out and looked at it, and see, it was just what we wanted, because we didn't want a tall door. We wanted one just at 6.5, 7 feet, and this was just a little over 7 feet. It was just right. So we had it when we came in there that night with that bobtail truck loaded to the gills with all this paneling and doors and windows and that, and told them what we paid for it. Well, I think Murray was ready to sign us up, because it cost us just a little over half what he figured we'd have to pay. So we had all, then we could start. And we finished, you see, the thing it was, people would meet us on the street and they'd say, I'd like to give you so much money. They didn't come to our church, but they said, several people from another church, I didn't say which one, they'd say, we'll give you we'd like to give you $1,000 for your building. And so before we got the building finished, it was paid for. And
Did you tell them you prayed until 11 o'clock the night before, whether you should build or
everybody
not?
was in agreement.
We all
When
prayed.
they came out, they said, they were all standing out there, said, we all agreed to a person that we're going to go ahead. And we
Because
did.
it was a drought.
Oh, it was during a time
Yeah.
when, you know,
They weren't getting anything. Farmers were
What?
going broke.
well, it wasn't, well,
It was kind of a
they'd had a
difficult-
lot harder times. But it was a difficult time, but it turned out, then when we had the dedication, we had Dr. Garberson come for our dedication.
Calvary Bible.
Then we stayed there until 1965. That was another place, I think. We prayed and the Lord directed us very definitely that we should go. So
Daddy
we
was
went.
sick.
And well, yes, I was having a problem. I didn't exactly know what it was because I'd had it when I was at Gates Rubber Company. I had it for 12 years, and it was getting so bad that, well, there'd be some nights, wake me up in the night, and then when we went to, I know the Lord directed us to Wichita. No question about it, because here I had gone for 12 years. I didn't exactly know what the problem was because the doctors always told me, he said, you just have a nervous stomach. That's what the doctors would always tell me there at Gates. So when I went to Wichita, there at Derby actually, which is a suburb of Wichita, but I had to go into Wichita to the doctor. The very first night we were in Derby, I got a call from one of the ladies, said, Mr. Abbott, my husband is having surgery in St. Joseph's Hospital in Wichita, and could you go in and see him? I didn't even know how to get to Wichita or to St. Joseph's, but I finally made it in there, and I met this lady, Mrs. Krause, and her husband had, well, he was an alcoholic, we didn't know it at that time, but he'd had such bad ulcers that he was bleeding within, and so when it was about 2:30 in the morning when I got in there to the hospital, and there was the doctor, and that's the reason I know now that's the reason the Lord led me there, was for that doctor. His name was McCarricker, and when I went into the room to see Mr. Krause, he had just come out of surgery, and Dr. McCarricker was there, and he said, boy, he said, if I ever need a preacher, I'm going to call on you, because I don't know of a preacher that will come out at 2:30 in the morning, and you haven't even been here 24 hours in Derby. So anyway, just a short time after that, because I was only there a year, but just a short time after that, on a Sunday morning, I was too sick to go to the service.
It was on Wednesday prayer meeting night, Daddy.
Well,
You doubled up.
the time that Dr. McCarricker came though was Sunday morning.
It's Sunday morning.
Because Wednesday night we went in the hospital, and even the doctor in the emergency room there, he was flirting with the nurse. He didn't even know what was with me. But Sunday morning when I couldn't go to the service, and the deacons called Dr. McCarricker, and he came in and he sat down and asked me a few questions, and he said, I can tell you right now what your problem is. You've got a bad gallbladder.
You've got gangrene.
And no, he didn't say that.
Well, he
but
said it's infected.
he said, don't wait till it does get.
It was though.
And so I said, well, Dr. McCarricker, I don't think it, because I worked at the Gates Rubber Company in Denver, and they have some very good doctors there, very good x-ray technicians. And they told me not once, but several times that I didn't have a bad gallbladder.
They
He
couldn't
said,
find
well, I don't want to question those fellas, but he said, I can tell you from what you tell me. He said, you can have such a bad gallbladder, it won't be picked up on x-ray. So he said, I want you to go in. He gave me a go into the St. Joseph's Hospital and get, well, they give you a little packet of barium. You take, he said, now, whatever you do, you take those exactly as it says on that instructions. Well, when I brought those home, I had just come home. You're supposed to take them an hour apart. And you can't take them after 11 o'clock. If you take them after 11 o'clock, your x-ray the next morning will not be good. Mm-hmm. So right after I got that medicine, Henry Drake and his boys came. They said, Lyle, would you like to go into the baseball playoffs? And I said, boy, I would. So I went into Wichita to the playoffs. They were the college and university teams. And wouldn't you know it, in the last game, it got into a tie game, and they went right up to 25-11. And boy, I thought, I'm not going to be able to take those because I still had so many pills to take before 11 o'clock in 25 minutes, and I wasn't about to tell Hank, listen, I'm supposed to go into x-ray in the morning and I have to take the last. And boy, when I was praying about this, the guy got up and knocked a home run, won the ball game, and boy, when we hot-footed over there, I just got in the house about 6 minutes to 11, took that last pill. So I went in there, and this fellow took the x-ray, and he said, well, he said, you don't have a gallbladder trouble. You don't have gallbladder trouble. So I thought, well, see. So I went in to see Dr. McCarricker and he said, well, I believe that I'm going to send you back in. So I waited 3 days, and then I went back through that same routine. And when I went back this time, this fellow said, Dr. McCarricker said something we're doing wrong. And so he wants me to stand you up at the table and strap you to that table. And then, as you're drinking that barium, to take several pictures of you in different positions. So that time, the man said, you have a bad gallbladder. He said, apparently before, the thing of it is, you're so full of stones that it was opaque. It wasn't even showing on x-ray. So then when
And it was high and above where
so anyway,
it normally should be.
When Dr. McCarricker said no, so then you go in, and so I did. I went in on a Sunday evening, and they operated the next morning and performed that. And then in the next, well, in fact, we were praying that the Lord would permit us to get back to Colorado. So we did. We had one of our friends, mother, listen.
Okay.
Did you see what time it is?
I know.
And yes,
You should.
I'm trying to keep it. That was in August of '65. And well, I have to tell you this. That's what Mom was telling me. When we went down to, when in fact, they called up to my room and told me that they would, I'd be ready to go. So, and she gave me a little envelope, and I just stuck it in the pocket because I thought, well, that's the bill, and I don't want to look at it. So, when we got home, or when we got down to the desk to sign out, she said, Mr. Abbott, I have to tell you that we have never, in all the years that we've had our hospital, we've never
Done this for a Protestant pastor.
done this for a Protestant minister.
Oh.
But when your church agreed to pay half the bill, we decided that we would just cancel the other half. So I didn't. Then when I got home and we went to see Dr. McCarricker, the real man that did the operation there, his name was Hodson. He was a specialist. I was in there 5 hours, and he told Mother that he just had to kind of use me as a trampoline. He just got up there and...
He literally got up on his stomach.
Yeah.
He said it was far above his rib cage.
And anyway,
he had to just dig it
5
out.
hours, and well,
It was all
I was in there 10 days, and I've never had not another bit of problem with it. The only thing is, I think that's what eventually led to my diabetes.
Yes.
I'm sure of that.
What was the bill? How much was it?
$600 and some for the hospital, and then you see when I got to Dr. McCarricker and Dr. Hodson, I thought sure. Well, in fact, he told me one Dr. Hodson was $1,500. I don't know what McCarrickers, but he said
Y'all canceled.
we canceled it.
We didn't have.
We didn't pay a dime.
No, but you didn't tell them about how you got in too. That was a miracle.
Well, of course,
that was a
you see, I told Dr. McCarricker, what I said to him, Dr. McCarricker, can I go to the county hospital? He said, yes, you could, but he said, they don't have any facilities there. So what's your problem? I said, I don't have any insurance. And he said, well, why don't you call St. Joseph's and tell them what your situation is, tell them you've got a bad gallbladder, and tell them that I recommended that you call them. So Mommy called that lady.
And we got down and prayed first.
And she said, she said, if your husband has a bad gallbladder, I waited until mine ruptured. Now don't let your husband do that. You get him in here right away.
See, God put the right person there.
So I went in there. So then in 1940 and 66, we got an invitation to come to Aspen, and so we were there March of 1966 until March of 1973, and in the meantime we had the Lord had directed us to an acre of ground out near Aspen, about 15 miles, wasn't it? Out to Old Snowmass, and the Lord directed us to the ground. He directed us to the house that we were going to put on it, and directed us all through building it, and then and I was also working at the school, at Aspen Schools, and I worked there until March. In fact, it was 13 years to the day, March the 23rd, that we came 66, and we 13 years later in 79, March 23rd, we left Aspen. To the very day we came here and into Salida, and we have been, the Lord's blessed us here.
Aspen was one of the busiest places we were in. We never sat down at the table without someone with us.
That would be another story in itself.
Yeah.
But,
there are a lot of stories in themselves.
Yeah,
Many.
So, you can shut the...
Well,
Guess
he's got
so.
three. He's got three more.
You got turned on, Johnny?
Yeah. What did you do for fun as a family?
Fun in the family?
Yeah, what did you do as a family?
Tell them, Mother. We had all kinds of
Don't
fun.
you want to, Daddy?
No, Mother, I've told them all the ministry. You tell them the fun we had.
Well, you mean when your children were little?
Oh, just little, and as we grew up.
As you grew up?
Just briefly.
Briefly,
Let's go.
yeah, briefly.
Okay, we had a very happy home. I just think of it, when I think of my own home,
Briefly.
when I was a youngster, I can't remember it being a very happy home. When I think of our children, It was a very happy home. The children were happy. We always enjoyed each other and loved each other and had our fusses and little differences, but there was just such a love bond there. They loved and prayed for each other. And when we were young, we used to play red light and hide and go seek, and then we played little simple games. We had our devotions in the evening, and they loved to sing. Kids sang all the time. We had sing-spirations in our home after services. We always had Friday evening when we let them take one friend home. It was open house for their friend. Their friend could come. We encouraged their friends to come to our house. We never liked for our children to go away and spend the night. So they were free to come, and we were glad to have them provide for their refreshments or whatever. And as the children grew older, then they started playing their games, and Dad and I always put their school very first. I was spiritual chairmanship of the PTA every school, wherever we were, and I was also homeroom mother for every one of the children throughout all their grades. So we got in contact with the other children. We knew their friends. Is that enough?
Yeah, that's fine. How have you redirected your energy in the last few years?
Well, I'm teaching a Bible class down in Cotopaxi. And we've been
Counseling in the home. Much. Praying.
oh yeah.
Yes. Tell them that day after breakfast.
Well, we spend about 3 hours in the morning in prayer and devotions every morning. We
Take
pray
prayer
for them.
requests. We have a large list of
Not only pray for our children, but we
Correspondence.
pray for our
prayer requests.
church people.
We pray for many of the former church members, churches. We do. We follow up on them.
Briefly, what is your point of view concerning death?
Death.
You say death?
Death. Death.
Well, let me tell you like this. One time there was a little boy that, in order for him, every night, he had to pass by the cemetery. And he would always whistle, and so one night a lady met him and she said, "Sonny, aren't you afraid to go past the cemetery?" He said, "No, my home is just on the other side." That's the way I look at death. I think actually death is experienced for the Christian, even though it's going to be difficult. Yet I think as far as our perspective is concerned, it's not. I like what D.L. Moody, he said someday you're going to read in the paper that D.L. Moody is dead, but D.L. Moody has just begun to live. And this is the way I look. I think that
That's right.
even though there's a transition period, it's something for the Christian that it's going home.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be a reunion of friends and loved ones that you possibly haven't seen for several years. I've never looked since I've been a Christian. I've never looked at death as a sad. I'm always, when I was pastor and I had to conduct a funeral for an unsaved family, I always felt very bad. But for a Christian family, even though I would always express there's a real joy there. And I don't, as far as a favorite scripture verse, it's a little difficult to come up with I think some of the best verses that I can think of, one of them that's a real encouragement to me is in Genesis 18:25, when Abraham was he was really bargaining with the Lord at the time of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, when he said, would you be willing to not destroy it if there were even 10 righteous there? And then at the last of that verse, in Genesis 18:25, he says, shall not the judge of all the earth do right? You think of it. And even in our life, the Lord is always going to be fair, he's always going to be just, he's always going to be, it says, shall not the judge of all the earth do right? It's always been an encouragement to me. And also in the 37th Psalm, there are several verses there. He says, delight thyself in the Lord, and he shall give thee the desires of thine heart. That doesn't mean he's going to give you, but he's going to give you right desires. He's going to make your desires so that they will be in perspective with what God's will is for your life. And then he also says, the steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord. And also in that 37th Psalm, he says, commit thy way unto the Lord, and trust in him, and he shall bring it to pass. I suppose if I were going to look for one verse, that I think that Psalm 37 where it says, commit thy way unto the Lord. And that, I think, I've always looked at that, that's a daily thing. At the very beginning of the day, commit thy way unto the Lord, trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. And I think of some of the verses that have been misquoted, and I think of Dr. Homer Hammontree when he said he had a class of colored boys, little black boys, and one time they were learning in the 8th chapter of Romans where it says, if God be for us, who can be against us? This little boy learned it. If God be for us, you're up against it.
The truth. Yeah.
And so, even, when Dr. Walter Wilson one time was counseling in an evangelistic meeting, and one of the men that came forward was very eager. He wanted to be a Christian, and he didn't. He said, Dr. Wilson said, have you ever learned any of the scripture? Do you know any verses? He said, yes, I know John 3:16. So Dr. Wilson said, before we pray, would you like to quote that verse? And so this man says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. And Dr. Wilson said to him, do you know why God forgot his Son? The man said, no. He said, so he could remember you. I like that.
Just quickly, how have you coped with the physical changes of aging?
Well, I don't tell them, Mother.
You, honey.
Tell them, Abbott. You're older than I am.
You're the one that's coping with it.
Well, I don't know.
Grandma, lean in a little bit.
Lean in.
Lean in a little
You're too
bit.
far.
Okay. Do you want Daddy to tell you?
No, Abbott.
Either one.
Yes.
You don't have to
Either
get
one
real
of you.
specific.
Just generally.
We both do the same thing.
Yes, we do.
Sure.
Yeah. We just know that the Lord will watch over us. He's promised he'll never forsake and he'll never leave us. And that he'll never give us anything above that we're able to bear. And we have that confidence in him that we know that he is our strength from day to day. And more than that, we know that he loves us. He cares for us. And that he really loves us. We just think back about all the things he's done for us. We know he has shown his love so many times, and he's proved his word is true. We can depend on it.
Well, we were just talking about that yesterday because we go through some of these same experiences, or even, and there's one word in it. It says Ebenezer. A lot of people don't. They think of Ebenezer Scrooge and Ebenezer, but the word Ebenezer means hitherto hath he helped us.
Hitherto hath he led us.
Always. So, and I remember that one fellow said that if you want to know what God is going to do in the future, look to see what he's done in the past. It's true. God will not.
It's a bright future. The future is just as bright as the promises of God.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, maybe what advice would you give to each of your children, grandchildren, or great-grandchildren?
Well,
all of them.
Do as you please, but please do right. No, I'll tell you what. I remember one time Clarence Jones, who was the director of the Quito, Ecuador, that station, HC, what is it?
Heralding Christ, Jesus blessings.
Yeah, JCB or something. Doesn't sound right, but he said there's always been a question with him because young people that come forward and they accept the Lord, and then sometime later in an invitation, they think, well, now maybe I ought to go forward again. And so they go forward, and sometimes they don't know whether this is right, whether they should. But Mr. Jones said, and I think this is one thing that I would say to my children, when I've said to my children, I think they already know it, to the grandchildren, that there should be one time in your life when you say yes. When you come to the Lord, there is a time when you say yes. Then from then on, whenever the Lord speaks to you and wants you to say,
I'm listening.
You see, there's always that willingness, there's always that obedience. But there isn't the question to say, well, now, do I have to go forward again? But there is that one time that you have to make that decision and receive Christ. And then from that time on, he said just,
I'm listening.
Yes.
Is there anything you want to say in closing, or?
See about that? Yeah, let's go to bed.
Let's go to bed.
Huh?
What do you want us to do? Kiss each other? No, we don't kiss.
In the evening? I thought this was in the morning.
Daddy. No, we just love each other so much. No.
Why don't you just tell one hunting story?
One hunting story?
Yeah. Or about one character in your church.
Well, I can tell you one hunting story. We used to go down to what they call the lower country, down below, that is, below Craig.
Excuse me,
It was down in a country that was called Cold Spring. And this is where the deer and the elk go down there for the winter. So but when you go down there in October, there are thousands of deer, and it's really a paradise for hunting. Well, one year we went, and there was a man, our postmaster at Yampa, his name was Mark Cole, and he had a brother-in-law that came from Goodland, Kansas. He'd never been big game hunting, but he always wanted to go. So he came up. That one it was in 1944, and the ones that went, we had Mr. McFarland. That's another story in itself. His father was a minister in Philadelphia. Was a very conservative man. Where John Wanamaker, if you ever heard of him, a Christian man, Mr. McFarland was his pastor. But anyway, Jim and Billy McFarland ran away from home and came out to Yampa when they were just teenagers. They lived all their life there. Jim always went hunting with us. He was in his 70s. Real delight to go along. And then there was Mr. Allen, who ran the store, Freddie Moore, Clyde Page, and Bob Crossan, and myself. And this time we had this brother-in-law of Mark Cole, who had never been big game hunting. So when the night before we decided we would go hunting, it was an easy country to hunt. The ridges go right up into that. And so we decided that we'd just assign a man to a ridge. We'd just start walking up those ridges, and they've got these valleys and parks in between. And so we start out usually just a little before daybreak, because I think that's a real good time to start. And we got, maybe it was just good daylight, and the fellow that was the brother-in-law, they decided to put him to the far left on the ridges, and then the next one would be Mr. McFarland, then Freddie, and then myself, and then Mr. Allen. So, but anyway, we just got up, and it just got good light, and we heard 2 shots, and then we waited a long time, and then about 10 o'clock in the morning, we heard another shot. Well, no, it wasn't till 10 o'clock. In fact, the first 2 shots, and then just a little while after that, there was another shot. So we thought, well, we all decided we'd go over and see what was going on. So we got over in this, and where the deer, big buck, came right up across this ridge where this fellow had never hunted before. He shot, and the deer went down, and he went over and tied his license on the horn, and the deer got up and took off. And went over the next ridge, and Jim shot him, Mr. McFarland, and that time he went down. Well, here comes this Mark's brother-in-law. He says, "Hey, that's my deer." And Jim said, "Oh no, not this deer. He was running up over the ridge, and I shot him. That couldn't be your deer." And so when we all got over there, they look at this deer, and there was only one shot. There's only one shot went right through the base of his neck. There was not another shot. There was not another hole. But right at the base of the horn, you could tell that's probably where that fella hit him. It was right at the base of the horn. It knocked him out, and he went down. He went over and tied his. And old Jim says, "Now listen," he said, "anytime a man can run up and tie his license on a deer, he says he's entitled to it." And that's the way it ended. I tell you, that was the funniest thing I ever saw. He said, "Okay," he said, "anytime a man can run up and tie his license on a deer, he's entitled to it."
You have another minute?
Yep. Tell us about the time you locked that guy in the garage.
That was another thing I should have told you. This was Jim McFarland. That was the first time I went hunting with it was the same fellows. There was Mr. McFarland and Howard Allen and Clyde Page and Fred Moore and myself. And it was in October of 1943. I know I went there in 42, and I was so eager to go hunting with these fellas because they always talked about how many deer and what a time they had over there. Howard Allen, see, it was during the war, so everything was rationed. But he would take ham, he would take bacon. You couldn't buy those in the store. They were rationed. But he'd always take them in the hunting. Candy bars and things like that you couldn't buy in the store. And we met the night before, and we planned all, so then they said, "We're going to leave here at daybreak tomorrow morning." And I went home, and we didn't have an alarm clock, and we didn't have the only thing we had in our room was a pole chain on the light. And so about every 10 minutes I'd pull the light on because I couldn't see the clock without it. And boy, I went sound asleep. And I pulled the chain, looked at it. It was 10 after 4, and we were supposed to be there, see. So boy, I jumped up, I got my clothes on, I already had my blanket and my gun and what things I needed down at the door, and I just picked them up and I took off. It was just in the next block. So I got over there, and it was Freddie Moore was sitting in his pickup, sitting out in the driveway, and I said, where is everybody? He said, boy, I said, I don't know. I've been here quite a while and nobody has showed up. So I said, well, come on, let's get them up. So we went over there and knocked on the door, and Mr. Allen came, still had his pajamas on, and he said, Lyle? I said, yeah. And he said, Freddie? And I said, I thought we were going to leave here at daybreak. He said, right. Well, come on in, and I'll get Lila, and she can start breakfast. So she got up, and she had sausage and eggs and biscuits, everything, and she had them all ready, and she said, I wondered what's the big hurry? And I said, well, Lila, we were going to leave here at daybreak. She said, it's only 2:45. And I said, what? I left home at 10 after 4. She said, well, it must have been 20 after 2. And that's what I did. I just looked at that clock. It was 20 after 2, and I got home. I tell you what. So we sat around there for about an hour and a half, and finally we decided that we'd go over and pick up Mr. McFarland. So we went over there, and he was just eating breakfast. And so everybody went in, Clyde Page and Howard Allen and Bob Crossan, and we all walked in there and just sat around and had a cup of coffee. And then Mrs. McFarland said, now Jim, I want to remind you, you be sure and lock that barn, because now you're going to be gone for probably a week or almost a week, and I don't want anybody getting in that barn. So we went out and we got the tent. That's what we had to pick up there. He had a big tent that you could put in about 20 people in that tent. And we'd always put all our grub and all our supplies and everything in Jim's tent. So we went out and we locked the door. And then we went out and got in Fred's pickup. I rode with Fred and Howard Allen and Bob Crossan were in another pickup, and then Clyde Page and Leonard, can't remember his last, Craig, was in the other pickup. Well, the pickup right ahead of us had the tarp on it, and the tarp blew off. So we stopped to put that tarp back on, and when we went up into Clyde's pickup, Freddie said, don't you have Mr. Mack with you? And she said, no, I thought he was with you. So he said, boy, he said, he's not here. We better, it was just 6 miles. We'd gone 6 miles, so we turned around and we went back. Before you ever got in where you could hear this old boy, we'd locked him in the barn. And I tell you what, he never spoke to us. He rode with us, but he never spoke to us till we got way over on the other side. We were almost into Irish Canyon. That's almost just a short way of where we had to go to where we were hunting. He never spoke a word. Finally, he said, I'll bet you a buck we don't see a deer going through Irish Canyon. So Fred said, okay. And I thought, boy, listen, we're getting into that area. I would think we'd be seeing deer everywhere. Why would he make a bet like that? So when we got through the canyon, It was really, you could see, well, a lot of places where, although it's pretty steep. You ever been over in that Irish Canyon? That road that goes into Rock Springs?
Oh, yes.
Well, there's that Irish Canyon. You go up through that real rugged rock. And somebody said, why did you bet $1 that you'd never, he said, you know, I've been coming over here since I was a kid and I've never seen a deer in here, and I thought sure we wouldn't see one this year. We didn't either. But boy, when we got through Irish Canyon and got over into that where we were going to camp, that night we went up on there was a little mesa there. Boy, there must have been 500 deer there. Just looked like, well, it looked like cattle. Never saw anything like it in my life. They were just so content there. They're just grazing along there. The next morning is the same thing when we see in that place where we hunted. It was on a big sheep ranch, Sparks Ranch, and all those canyons went right down into that meadow, and the deer would go down in there and they would just feed with the sheep. Then when it got the sun come up, then they'd go up, and they'd go up in these little breaks, up in these little there most of it was jack pine and pinyon. And then when you got on up higher, it was aspen and green timber. But those little breaks, they'd come up and they'd bed down in those, and then at night they'd go back down in the meadow and feed. And so what you would do, some of the men would go along the road, but every once in a while you'd meet one of those farmers. They weren't game warden, but they would tell you don't shoot any deer in the meadow, because many guys had shot some of their prize sheep. So we decided that we would go and we'd let guys walk down along the bottom, and that would drive those deer up on, then you could pick them off. One time, well, in fact, one year, Fred and I, it was a year that you could get 2 deer. Stop at Craig. If you had a license, they'd give you a little metal tag. You could get the second deer and put that little metal tag on there. And we had 9 fellows, and we could get 18 deer. Fred and I got 11. We got to, in fact, one morning, Howard Allen and Mr. McFarland was coming up through a patch of aspen, and here you could see these deer. Fred and I were up on top. It was like a shooting gallery. You just wait until a good one would come along and knock him down. We had 11. In that.
He had a picture of them all strung up on a line.
I tell you, that was I thought, boy, now if we get back to camp and everybody else has got, what in the world are we going to do?
Go to jail.
Well, of course, and you see, that was another thing. Mr. McFarland, he had hunted down there for years. He would never shoot a buck, never. Sometimes if he hadn't got a deer, after the first couple of days, we would put him and Howard Allen up in what we call a saddle, because the deer would go up through there, and Fred and I would go down and walk back and forth through those jack pines and the pinyon, and the deer would go up through there. We got right up close, and there was a funny thing there. This Howard Allen, he must have been in his 70s, don't you think, Mommy?
No, I don't think so, Daddy.
Well, he was.
He's pretty agile.
Well, I know, but
Probably in his 60s.
He had what they call that vision. His eyes rolled. Rotary vision.
Whatever.
His eyes rolled.
They rolled. And
when he'd get excited,
they rolled. And you ever
his
seen
whole
him
eyes,
like
you just
that?
see his
I
eyes.
mean, it spun just really
Just
fast.
roll like that.
It rolled all over his
We
head.
got up there, maybe we were probably
Everybody.
75 yards from where
He
Jim
gets so excited.
and Miss and Howard were, and there was one big buck. I mean, it was a big buck that went right up. Well, Howard could have reached his gun out and shot him. And there Howard was. And old Jim says, get him the next time around, Howard.
Yeah,
And when he was putting his fishing pole together, that was the funniest thing you ever saw. Everybody would jump out of the car, see, and it was the first day of the fishing season, and Mr. Bird especially, he'd have his pole all set to get, and he'd say, I'll bet you 50 cents I'll catch the first fish. And he'd jump out, and here was Howard. Trying to get that pole put together in his own line. Going around and around. And usually Lauren caught the first fish because Howard didn't even have his pole put together yet. And everybody else was standing there laughing so hard you couldn't. That was good. But then one time, I remember Mommy, we got, a boy came to borrow my gun. Lawrence Phelps wanted to borrow my gun, and I couldn't afford to let him take it. So,
well, Daddy dear, start the beginning then. It was, see, he went over to borrow Howard's first, Howard Allen's.
oh yeah.
He went to Howard, and Howard said, I can't let you use the gun because we're going hunting tomorrow.
Yeah.
And then Floyd, was his
No, it
name?
was Lawrence.
Was it Lauren? I thought it was a younger one, Daddy.
No, it was the older one.
Oh.
Older
Okay.
boy that wanted to borrow him. And it was the same thing there. I couldn't
And
because,
he came to Daddy to borrow Daddy's gun, and he said,
they
he
said,
couldn't
Howard
buy-
told me that you're going to be.
yeah, you're going hunting
Going to go.
tomorrow. So Daddy then couldn't let him borrow his gun. He says, tomorrow? He says, well, they didn't tell me. They set it up a day. Howard, you just said that so he wouldn't have to lend that boy his gun. And it wasn't true. They weren't going, tomorrow. Well, so then then Daddy got real excited. And he called Freddie. And he said, Fred, did you know we're leaving tomorrow? No, he didn't tell me.
And then
So
to
you
top
never
it all
saw
off,
such a
we
mix-up.
finally got it
Oh, that was
straightened out
crazy.
again. And I went up to Fred's.
Oh, it
Mom
was
and I
crazy,
went
Leigh.
up.
It was just
And,
unbelievable.
So
Just because Howard
I got up
fibbed.
there about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and Mrs. Moore
Oh,
came
that
out
was
on
crazy.
the porch. And
What, you going tomorrow? I don't
Yeah.
have things ready.
yeah, and then I said, where's Fred? She says, oh, he's in Steamboat getting the pickup fixed. And he said he's supposed to pick up Mrs. Gray and the grub. Well, here comes Fred. And he didn't have Mrs. Gray, and he didn't have
the
the
groceries.
groceries. So he said, what I'll do, he said, I'll do the chores and you go in and get Mrs. Gray and get the groceries. So I came in, and then here comes Fred. Later on that night, we were supposed to leave at 9 o'clock.
That night?
Yeah, this was when we finally got around
Get straightened out.
get it straightened out. And so Fred came in about 9 o'clock, and we were sitting there. Mom had made fresh pie and coffee, and so while we were sitting there, Fred got a funny look on his face, and I said, "What's the matter?" He says,
You forgot.
"He says, I left all that stuff at home." He says, "We got to go back up there."
Oh, it was.
So when
I'll
we
tell you,
finally got into Craig at 1 o'clock in the morning,
it was
and
such a hunting party.
we got in there, and we're having a bowl of chili, and there was a gal, a great big heavy-set gal that was serving that, and she would come over there when you'd get a spoon of that chili up just about ready, and she knew a part of a song. She'd say, "Back to my sweetheart that's waiting, back to my," and just about the time you get that
That's all she
spoon
knew.
up there to take that, she'd come out with that song, and we got to giggling like a couple of little kids. We finally had to get up and get out of there. We'd have been in there forever. So when we finally got down into this country where we were going to go hunting, it was moonlight. And here, right just as we came through this canyon, there was a bobcat. Right, it wasn't 10 feet off the road, drinking out of a little pond or seep or whatever it was there. And Fred said, "Boy, hold it." So he put the spotlight on it and he shot, He must have shot under it because the thing screeched and jumped up in the air. Must have been a shot where he just got along the belly and it took off. And Fred said, that's one thing I'm not going to go out and chase in the dark. So we went on and we passed. Now they said, now, when you go along the road where we usually camp, you'll see that we've got a pair of Lila's panties hanging on the fence. So that's where you turn off. Well, we must have both been
Huge big woman.
well, yeah. We've got like a laundry bag, but we both, we never missed it. We drove right on by.
See how you're gonna miss them.
Listen, it must have been 4 o'clock in the morning when we finally got, he finally got so sleepy, he said, Lyle, you'll have to drive. So I was driving, and I was looking for deer. And we finally got up into that Dinosaur National Park. And when Fred woke up, he says, where are we? I said, well, I've never seen a place to turn off. He said, well, we've gone too far because we're in Dinosaur National Park. We have to turn around. So we had to go way back. By the time we got back there, why, he said, we might just well take a nap in the car. And because the fellas, it was only just a little while and we saw the fellas get up and start breakfast. So we just got down there in time. That was terrible. We were supposed to leave at 9. We went out to Fred's. Well, it was, I'll tell you, there was some of those hunting expositions that really got to be
They were a riot, I'll tell you. You wouldn't believe it. You never saw anybody. When the war started, did you see that Larry in Jerusalem? That young man on CNN?
They probably didn't.
Oh, I'll tell you. He got war nerves. What was it called? But he went all to pieces.
Battle. Well, he didn't get battle fatigue.
I've never seen anyone do that.
He was so excited he couldn't even get his gas
They
mask
took him
on.
off CNN. I couldn't believe it. I felt so sorry and I kept thinking, why don't they take him off?
The first night they had the Scud
he will be so embarrassed.
Well, he was so excited he couldn't even get his gas mask on.
It was just sad. I feel so sorry for him.
Mother, you know, I said...
Yes,
boy,
I'm
Is there
getting
one
very...
thing you wanted to say in closing, Mom?
Yeah, I was going to say something.
That thing's still going?
Yes, it's going. I was just going to say
Well,
one
so
thing.
am I.
Well, Daddy, now you don't leave me.
No, sir.
You got to stay here. You have it on, Johnny?
Yeah.
Yeah, there just was one more thing I would like to add. One verse that's been, and God gave me when I was very sick with pneumonia, and I felt it was a beautiful thing that He gave me. He said, and He said unto them, set your hearts unto all the words which I testify among you this day, which ye shall command your children to observe to do all the words of this law. For it's not an empty thing for you, because it is your life. And through this thing ye shall prolong your days in the land. And God gave me that verse. And then the other one, the promise that I look forward to His fulfilling is this. Thou lovest righteousness and hatest wickedness, therefore God, thy God, hath anointed thee with the oil of gladness above thy fellows. The king's daughter is all glorious within, her clothing is of wrought gold. She shall be brought unto the king in raiment of needlework. The virgins, her companions who follow her, shall be brought unto thee. With gladness and rejoicing shall they be brought. They shall enter into the king's palace. Instead of thy fathers shall be thy children. Because my fathers weren't Christian, you see. My ancestors. But instead of mine will be my children, whom thou may make princes in all the earth. And that has been. And I look forward to that, and I believe that. I believe that my children, if they put God first in their life, whether it is my child, my grandchild, or great-grandchild, And that is my one prayer for them, that God will be first in their life. And if He is first in their life, God will bless them, not only in this world, but in the world to come. Right?